Good evening, everyone. It's Tuesday, May 6th. We're going to start this committee of the whole meeting, and I'm going to call it to order at 6:30 p.m. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection. Please join me in a moment of silent reflection, or maybe reflecting on the fact that our Prime Minister was meeting with the leader of the United States earlier today, and that we might want to reflect on that. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement, the municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on to the second item, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? I note that none were received in advance of tonight's meeting. Seeing none, moving on to item number 3.1, correspondence, answers to rural focus group questions from delegation to council, April 22nd, 2025, and this is being brought forward by Councillor Darrell. Councillor Thoms, would you like to introduce the matter?
I just want to thank Director Baxter for getting those answers to everyone in the rural focus group in a timely manner that we said we were going to. And I just really wanted to have it elevated to correspondence so it was available publicly for everyone to see. Maybe people weren't at that meeting and didn't know the answers were coming, but now they get to view them online at their convenience, and they're out there for everybody to have a look at.
Thank you for bringing that forward, and I thank Councillor Clare also for asking for that to be brought forward at a future council meeting. So the recommended motion is that I have a mover and seconder to receive this correspondence for information. So can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by Councillor Darrell, seconded by Councillor Less. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item number 4, items for consideration. 4.1. This is a really exciting report. Report CS 0925, reappointment of 2 youth councillors and amendment to the terms of reference. Can I ask staff to add anything to the report that was put in front of council?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. You're right. It is a really good news story. So Council approved the terms of reference last year in November when the new procedure bylaw was put into place. And since then, we have followed our regular process as per the appointment policy to review and advertise this position and then go through the selection process. I do want to note that we received some really, really excellent candidates for this position. And I think that the 2 of the members who are on council who are part of the selection committee can speak further to that. We feel that in this particular situation, instead of having one youth councillor, we should have 2, only because they're bringing very different skill sets to the position. And we feel confident that they'll be able to enhance the position. So that is why the report is coming for council's consideration. And if members of the selection committee want to say anything further, let's.
Yes, members of the selection committee. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So yes, and I think the clerk has already said that the candidates that came forward were all exceptional. I was so impressed with their focus and their abilities and their achievements. Just to add to the reason, another reason why we chose two was a little bit of succession planning, as well as being able to being mindful that this term of council will end before the next term, before the term of this youth will end. And we didn't want to be in a position where they could potentially, the candidate could potentially maybe leave and then leave council with no one. We wanted it to continue. So knowing that youth don't always have choice in what they do, parents sometimes decide as well, you know, we're going to move or whatever. We thought that having two youth really left that position alive and going through terms of council. So, and I just want to point out that we have Leah sitting in the back, and I don't think we have Emily here. So, just want to congratulate our candidates.
And Councillor Adam?
Thank you. So everything's already been said. We had unbelievable youth that came to apply for this. And I don't think that we could be in a better position. It was also one of the most difficult decisions that I've had to make as a counselor, is trying to figure out which of the candidates should be putting into this position. So very difficult decision to make. Very happy to have Leah and Emily on here, and looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you to the selection committee as well. And thank you to council for supporting this motion when it first came forward in February of 2023. It was part of, I think, this council's commitment to having more youth engagement and participation in local politics and decision making. And this is a really concrete way for us to be moving forward on this. So it's definitely a good day. Yes, Councillor Clare.
I'm thrilled to see this, and just as an update, among other things, I understand that the other councillor, Emily Mountjoy, is an active member of the cadets, and that is where she is this evening. Has got that update. And I also just, I appreciate, I don't know that we considered the idea of more than one, and I really am glad that the committee has brought forward that recommendation rather than feeling tied to previous discussions, especially because in this case, I note that we are now nominating a youth representative, one from each ward of the community. And I think in the context of a lot of the conversations we're going to be having tonight, I think that's really excellent, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming to this place. It's a happy report to get, and I'm going to read out the recommended motion in full this evening. That the following candidates be appointed as youth councillors to support Port Hope Council for the term ending June 2027 or until a successor is appointed: Leah Ferguson and Emily Mountjoy. And that the youth councillor terms of reference be amended to include reference that more than one youth councillor can be appointed at a time at council's discretion. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Congratulations. Moving on to item 4.2, report DS0825, recommendation report on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, ZBO2 2023, and draft plan of subdivision, SU01 2023, 5868 County Road 65. Does staff have anything further to add before council considers the report? Here we go. Yes. Just waiting for Theo to come to the, and we do have a little bit of a presentation.
Good evening, council members. I'm Theodora Maripeza, Manager of Planning, here to review my recommendation report regarding two applications submitted from DG Biddle on behalf of the Hill Street Development Ltd. It is not staff practice to have a presentation for recommendation reports. However, I felt it was necessary given that the public meeting was almost 2 years ago and a number of the iterations of the draft plan and accompanying study have taken place. Additionally, this brief and graphic presentation will complement the comparison table found as attachment 2 of my report. This is for context where this property is located. These are the subject land in the hamlet of Oseka. And for context, we have shown 2 other subdivision here. This one outlined in red is the one that is draft plan approval and received a 5th extension by council last year. And the one just to the south, there are 20 lots proposed there, and this is under construction. And this is another context when we are showing an overlay of the draft plan and how it compares with the 2 subdivisions to the south side of the 6th line. At the time of the public meeting, the subject land included the entirety of the property known as 5868 County Road 65. Since then, the owner was granted a provisional consent to sever 0.33 hectare lot that will contain the existing house, and this is the lot that has been taken out. It's a provisional consent. It was rezoned by this council last year as Hamlet Residential 1. As such, the subject land for this application were revised to include only the proposed retained lot. The initial draft plan that staff presented during the public meeting in 2023 consisted of 58 detached residential lot encompassing a lot area of 15.6 hectares on 4 new proposed street A to D. 4 of the lots were proposed on the northern portion of the property with an access of a bend on County Road 65, and according to county staff, with no safe distances. The open space area, this one that I'm outlining here, was only 6.61 hectares. This block here, block 50, only 0.21 hectare was proposed as a firefighting pond or a park, and a cash in lieu of parkland was proposed for the remaining balance of the required parkland. A number of studies have been submitted with the original draft plan, and I have provided a review of all the studies. I'm going to focus today only to 2. One is the environmental impact study, and the other one is hydrogeological report. So as you can see from this plan, some of the lots are being proposed within the significant woodlands. This cul-de-sac is pretty close to the woodland. The buffers that were proposed at the time was considered insufficient, only 5-meter buffer from the woodland and 15-meter from this unevaluated wetland. We hired North-South Environmental to peer review the report, and he concluded that there were several concerns with the EIS, some shortcomings in the field surveys, and not enough demonstration that the proposed development will not result in a negative impact to the natural features and their ecological function on the subject property, also the surrounding lands. The other report was hydrogeological report, which concluded we had hired BlueMetric to peer review the hydrogeological report prepared by DM Wills. It concluded that 58 lots would result in unacceptable level of nitrates at the property boundary unless advanced treatment was implemented. There was limited info on groundwater availability, and also our BlueMetric expressed concern re-evolution of nitrogen concentration to shallow, deeper aquifers that will supply drinking water. So the initial submission was made in January 2023. Several updates to the draft plan were made as a result of the municipal, county, and peer review comments. And here the 4th submission, draft plan. So here's the following changes that are being proposed. Decreased in the number of proposed residential detached dwelling from 58 to 38, and reducing almost in half the lot areas, only 7.9 hectares of residential lots. The unit count was reduced based on the recommendation of the hydrogeological report and the EIS mainly. Additional reduction was a result of elimination of these 4 lands here on the northern band, and now are excluded for subdivision land and are only identified as other lands owned by the applicant. This block would be considered a separate conveyable parcel of land following the registration of the plan of subdivision. 1 foot reserve along the County Road 65 has been requested by county, and this is a standard procedure to avoid the access to these lands, and until safe access can be demonstrated to the county's satisfaction. There is a decrease in the number of proposed new public streets from 4 only to 2. You see there Street A and Street B. Following the public meeting, municipal staff engaged in discussion with the proponent regarding the size, location of the parkland block. Now, the current plan proposes 0.61 hectares, and this is the block 41. This L shape is 3 times the size of the previous block. This block is visible from the County Road 65. It will serve the entire community of the hamlet of Oseka and surrounding rural areas. Furthermore, this block is configured in a manner that will allow for safe parking of vehicles on Street A and a safe distance from County Road 65. The natural open space that is shown here in green has doubled in size now, 12.63 hectares, and will be conveyed to the municipality. The conveyance of environmental protection land is a common practice to the municipality to the west. However, I'm happy to say that this is the first time for municipality to take over this protected area, and I would like to thank here Julia on this undertaking. Additionally, we have 2 stormwater management ponds, which were considered as the best option for quantity and quality control, and they are oversized to avoid the frequency of cleaning by the municipality. That was a request by the Works in Engineering. So this is the natural heritage constraint features, and you can see that all the buffers now have been increased to 30 meters from the wetland. And all along here is 15 meters with only a portion here with 10 meters. The municipality and applicant expert agree that post-construction monitoring program for septic systems should be implemented through draft plan conditions in order to ensure that there are no nitrate loading impacts from septic system. The monitoring program will ensure that well interference between wells on the site as well as adjacent private wells will be evaluated to ensure that all wells will always be able to meet the peak water demand. Also, a contingency plan will be prepared to the satisfaction of the municipality to address any development impact on water supply quantity and quality. A quick overview what the zoning is now. It's a future development, and on the right side is the proposed zoning. So we have done the public consultation. This slide was presented in the public meeting as well, using, meeting the minimum requirements of the Planning Act and going above and beyond. In conclusion, it's my professional opinion that the applications submitted have appropriate regard for matter of provincial interest, comply with the requirements of the Planning Act, are consistent with the Provincial Planning Statement 2024, and conform to the county and municipality official plan. The applicant, through various studies, has demonstrated that the proposed development is an appropriate use for the subject lands and aligns with the growing need for housing in a hamlet settlement area. And it is my recommendation to council that this application should be approved. I have put here the agency comments. During the initial one, you'll see that there was a lot of concern and need for information. And on the current one, there are no objections to the draft plan approval, subject to draft plan conditions. So this is quite a change from the table we presented during public meeting in 2023. Following this recommendation report, the next steps in the planning process will include the council provided decision. Staff will issue the notice of decision. If it is approved, then the proponent has 3 years to fulfill the conditions and come for final approval. Thank you. Those are my questions. And I wanted to note as well that we have representative from the proponent. We have Larry McDonald of Hill Street Development, and we have Lisa Kless, the planner from DigiBeetle. If you have any question, they're more than happy to answer those.
Thank you very much. And thank you for grounding council in a presentation that gave us the background and context and has shown us how this project has evolved over the last couple of years. That was very helpful in terms of recall and knowing where we stand now. So we appreciate that. Now I'll turn it over to councillor for questions. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I have comments first and then just a couple questions. So obviously I've been very invested in this community and the development that is potentially coming there. And some of the priorities for me were water, and still is water, as well as having a complete community up there in Osaka. And Director Schnook and formerly Director Davis and I went up for a tour up there, and we looked at potential parkland and so on. So, and there wasn't any. So I'm very happy to see this change come, and I want to thank both the applicant as well as staff for working on those negotiations. It's very important that we don't have a bedroom community, but we actually have a community that lives and works, and this is home to them. I think this is a big change that's going to be coming for Osaka, but I'm very, very happy to see this level of change and response to our concerns. My one question, and I think, Council, I don't want to go too much into this as well, is I was just talking to Councillor Toms, is the sub-watershed study that's coming. And I saw on the last slide, it's 3 years to fulfill the conditions. So are we expecting to get the sub-watershed study in that time to make sure that everything is copacetic and is also favorable to new development as well that's coming there?
Through the chair to Councillor Mink, that is a good question. I have talked to the GRCA. They don't expect that there's going to be any negative impact. And they have noted that all these technical studies and detailed studies that have been completed by the proponent will be helpful in completing the scope sub-watershed study.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councillor Less.
The question, there's one road in and there's no alternate ways out. Is that an issue with for fire or protective services?
Through the chair to Councillor Less, the traffic impact study has been reviewed by both the municipality and the county, and there was no concern. And also, I forgot to mention that in the park block, they are proposing a water reservoir and a dry hydrant. And our director of protective services have reviewed the drawings to date. And they agreed in principle, and they put a condition to look at the detailed design with regard to the location, signing, etc.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, thank you. My question is for Director Snook around the open space. Is there going to be any impact to Parks and Rec and Culture on this as far as service or any other cost implications?
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Todd. There will be implications as far as maintenance requirements for the park land itself. You know, from a rural access, we maintain parks in the whole municipality, so it is something that we're prepared to manage as far as our operational needs. The lands that are designated as open space on the map that's on the screen now that are the environmentally protected will be unmaintained. There are obviously, again, implications of monitoring those lands that we'll need to develop some policies through our parkland dedication update that is planned for the rest of this year.
Any other comments or questions? I do want to, oh, yes, Councillor Adam, go ahead.
Sorry, it's just a comment, and it's the presentation. Thank you. Too frequently do we have the staff reports with a ridiculous amount of information that we have to go through and try to figure out what is the best, and then you get 1,000 questions from us. The presentation was greatly appreciated, and I think you've done a great job, so thank you.
And just as a final comment, I do want to acknowledge, as you did as well, that this is a great example of a proponent being responsive and working in a true partnership and collaboration and ensuring that so many of the things that we had grave concerns about in the first instance have been resolved. And this is not often the case when we have proponents come forward. So I do want to acknowledge that this is I think of a really rare instance where the communication, the partnership, the work, and the outcome is very positive. So Councillor Clare.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was going to speak on this because I agree with everything that my colleagues have said, you've all said about how many changes. This looks way better, I think, than what we first reviewed in that public meeting. And I appreciate that this is also very much in line with our official plan and all of that. I will say though, in principle, I'm not sure that this is the best approach to growth and development for our community. I understand these are going to be quite large single family homes that are probably not going to be affordable to anyone who currently resides in Port Hope. But that is what is in our official plan. And I think I'm saying it today, not because I think we should not approve this given our current policies, but I think we need to really have an in-depth conversation as a community and as a council when we look at updating our official plan as to what we want to see in the rural community.
Thank you, Councillor Clare, and certainly that's come up in our strategic planning conversations and a real noting of the missing middle that we have in housing in our community, and in the fact, for example, that we've not built one apartment building since 2009. So these are all issues that are part of ongoing necessary conversations. But in terms of this particular report, the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. And can I ask a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Adam, seconded by Councillor Todd. Any further comments or conversation on the matter? All in favor? And that is passed. Moving on to item 4.3, I just want to report that we have decided to defer this item for a future council meeting. And in order to do that, we've had some conversations about this. I do need a mover and seconder to do that. Moved by Councillor Darrell and seconded by Councillor Clare. All in favor? And that is passed. Moving on to item 4.4, report ES 0725, RE 2024 Drinking Water Quality Management System, QMS Management Review. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before council considers the report? Okay. There is no staff to speak to this. So does council have any questions or comments that they would like to share in relation to this? Seeing Councillor Less?
Well done again. I mean, amazing.
We always do very well on this metric for sure. So the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder on this? Moved by Councillor Todd, second by Councillor Less. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to report 4.5, report CS 1025 re-weighted voting. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before council considers the report? Director of Corporate Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Hankivsky. And despite Councillor Pearson's comments about introductory statements, I'm going to keep my remarks short, considering the report is not. This report was requested by council, and the information provided is in keeping with the direction provided us through resolution. I'm hopeful it's provided some clarity from a legal perspective, from a legislative perspective, about the weighted voting measures that are incorporated in our amalgamation order, our transition board order. Effectively, opinions have been found that the interpretation should be done so narrowly, and the application of the weighted vote as it relates to tax rate adjustments arising out of amalgamation should be applied sparingly or to very specific tax adjustments. It has been used very sparingly over the course of the last 25 years. Only on 4 different occasions, or 4 different meetings, I should say, has the weighted vote been applied by our rural councillors. Weighted voting, as it relates or as it speaks to in the report, is not an available tool for lower tier municipalities. We have weighted voting because the transition board order outlined that specific tool for the municipality of Port Hope. As such, we don't have the authority to change that, amend it, or remove it, and would require, if council so chose, to seek the support of the province to do so. Hopefully the report's been helpful and has provided the clarity council was seeking, or council members from Ward 2 in particular. I would suggest the report and the clarity is probably long overdue. Ultimately, I'm not recommending any action other than to receive this for information. Where we go from here is subject to council's consideration, but the information provided should be taken under consideration when making any future decisions. And I'm very happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director, for that high-level summary, and thank you for the very thorough report. And I also want to note that this report contains not 1, but 2 separate legal opinions, including a separate legal opinion that is not our in-house legal representation. So now I'll turn it over to the council table for any comments or questions around the report. Councillor Less?
Yeah, it's interesting to note that of the 45 some odd municipalities that we solicited information from, not one of them has weighted voting in any form. And here we will later on this evening be entertaining trying to increase that weighted vote, which doesn't make much sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments around this? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So thank you for the report. I appreciate some of what you've written in the report and the, I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but the pressure that is put on us in making this decision. And what I might say might be unpopular, but I have been doing a lot of thinking, especially after the last meeting. And I've said this before. I'm sure my council colleagues up here and staff are going to get tired of me saying this, but we all answer, or I answer, questions from all wards. And after that meeting, from both wards, I'll say, there was a lot at first, emails that went to Daryl and I. And I keep saying and reiterating that Daryl and I are not the only 2 people available for the rural community. It's almost like preaching to the preach. We already know there's 5 other people up here willing to hear from you, and you have to reach out to them. And the more I started thinking about this, I've also had people who 2 votes, assuming the two rural councillors are going to be aligned in those two votes puts a lot of pressure. We could be opposed to a decision. And there's also people opposed to maybe the popular votes. So 2 votes in favor is also 2 votes against somebody else's opinion. And I hear all of those opinions all the time. So it does put the whole weighted vote does put a huge amount of pressure on the rural councillors that we are going to vote together in favor of an opinion that's also against somebody else. So I just wanted to kind of verbalize that so everybody really understands the position we're in with this.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Darrow.
Yeah, me as well. I've also had a lot of conversations with rural residents, and this has been going on for a long time. So I'm glad to see some level of clarity on this. As long it's not the answer maybe that all the rural ward was hoping to get, but at least we have clarity now, and we have a motion coming later this evening that I hope bridges the gap on the budget part of it, and we'll see where that goes once we get to it.
Thank you, Councillor Darrow. Yes, Councillor Clare.
I have a question. Answer as best you can. I understand we're all still wrapping our minds around some of this, but could you comment on what you know so far about the implications of strong mayor powers on the use of weighted vote, and how that impacts it? And specifically, I'd like to understand if you have any insight yet as to if we have, assuming we have these weighted votes, assuming we do not make any changes to that on planning and boundary adjustments, if there was a move by hypothetically, if the strong mayor power was used to veto a decision and council was going to move to override that decision using that super majority, would weighted votes also come into play in that override vote?
I'll start. It's a great question. I will start with saying we have a report coming that's exploring some of the implications around the new strong mayor's powers. I think ironically, we're reading a report, or you've received a report tonight that sort of describes a period in time where the municipal landscape was shifting pretty rapidly. I'd argue that strong mayor powers that are recently come into place just 4 days ago are sort of equivalent to that level of landscape change for municipal government. So there are major implications in terms of the authority. How it's used is going to be subject to the mayor, and every mayor that's been provided those authorities going forward will explore the implications. But as it relates to, let's say, the adoption of a Planning Act approval, like you just did a few minutes ago, if the mayor feels going forward that the bylaw and council's consideration of a bylaw related to a Planning Act approval is not in keeping with the spirit and the intention and the priorities as listed by the province, the mayor's vote and every mayor's vote will carry more weight than that on council. So by that perspective, in those limited circumstances that are still being reviewed, weighted voting wouldn't have an impact. Budget adoption, for instance, and this is still being explored, budget adoption moving forward, and this isn't subject to our mayor's consideration, this is just the new law. The budget presented for council's consideration will be the mayor's budget. Council will have a defined process of amending that budget, but there are also sort of veto powers within those authorities that the mayor will have and every mayor will have when considering the budget. So if the argument is, if members of the community argue that tax rate adjustments arising out of amalgamation should apply to every budget decision, well, strong mayor powers suggest otherwise. And the strong mayor powers issued to the mayor going forward would trump any consideration of weighted voting. Where we're at today in sort of adjusting to this, I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Councillor Clare.
Follow-up clarification, just to confirm my understanding. My understanding is the new budget process, the only role for council is to propose through resolution amendments to the budget, but council as a whole will not be voting to adopt the budget moving forward.
That's correct. And our report will speak to that. Our clerk's going to do a great job of exploring that. But ultimately, once the sort of established process for working through those amendments has been finalized, the budget will be considered as adopted. There won't be a final vote. That is the new authorities granted to our mayor and the 140 or 200 plus other municipalities that have been granted strong mayor authorities.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you again for this report. I think as was pointed out, this has been long overdue, and it's a process of clarifying a lot of the issues that have been brought forward to us, so we appreciate it. The recommended motion is to receive this item for information. Can I get a mover and seconder on that? Moved by Councillor Les, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? Thank you. And moving on to item 4.6, Report FS 0425, re 2025 Property Tax Levy Bylaw. Does staff have anything further to add before council considers this report? Director Baxter.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to the report. So just some context. So the budget, as you well know, has been passed. And at the time of passing the budget, we do an estimate for the property tax assessment change. And we model it based using the prior year's LRW funds. So here really today, we know you'll see in the report, the county, we now have the final assessment from MPAC. The county did do an adjustment to the tax ratios to reduce the multi-res, which ultimately, means that there's a larger share that goes to all the other tax classes, including residential. And then we have finalized the LLRW fund usage. The urban tax levy is being reduced by $321,000. Which has about a $48 reduction to this typical single detached residential home. The rural tax levy is being reduced by $336,000, which has about a $127 reduction for a typical single detached residential home. So overall, for that same typical single detached home, we'll pay $190 more for municipal services, being from Port Hope, $95 more for Northumberland County services. There's no increase to the education. So overall, $285 increase. I do note last year was $371, so $86 less increase than the prior year, bringing us to a total property tax bill of $5,133 for 2025. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director. Any questions or comments from around the table? Yes, Councillor Les.
So the LLRW funds used in the rural area, you state as 336,000. So that would mean that the investment was over 420,000 for 2024.
That is correct. So the sum of all the net earnings on the account was just over 420,000. So when we applied the 80%, that's where we got to the 336.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Any other? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. So you're saying in the report, property tax owners, residential, should expect a 5.9% increase. Is that on their total tax bill? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so just a follow-up question. We didn't let property owners know this in the fall. Based on your numbers, was that close to what, if it was announced at that time, would that have been close, or did you get a more accurate number that was significantly different when you brought this report forward?
So I'm going to speak to the actual dollars. So on the municipal portion only, right, we anticipated $178. So it came in at $190, so we were within $12 for all the assessment changes. And then plus on top of that, then the county changed the tax ratio just 2 months ago. So we came in very close. Now, obviously at that point in time, we don't know what the county's budget is looking like. So I can't do a comparison to the $285, but compared to the $190, we anticipated it to be $178. So we were very close.
Thank you. So based on this, I think it was more of a, maybe an exercise where we didn't announce it this time. And I think, I don't know, I think that was potentially done to stop some confusion and the variables that could happen. But I think it was a very unpopular decision. A lot of people need to know how much it's going to be. They need to refinance their mortgages, property sales, and so on. So I think that if we could, in the future, that we continue to at least try to give an increase with the communication that it's not 100% accurate because variables will happen before we finally know. But I think that we owe that to the community to at least give them a ballpark. But thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind if I jump in, Councillor Ellis, into the mix? So I have a couple of maybe somewhat sideways question, Director Baxter. One is, I have a question about whether or not there's ever been a contemplation about why the taxes for education get downloaded onto the municipal taxpayer, because it is a provincial responsibility. And I suppose it's a question about value for dollar that we're getting from both the province and the federal government in terms of the fiscal, the really failure of the fiscal framework that we currently have. So that's my first question to you. Second question brings it back to a little bit more local, and that's to the county. Can you please, for a matter of record, tell us what portion of the county tax levy is paid by the municipality of Port Hope in proportion to the other municipalities in the county? And also whether or not we have any information about the value for dollar that we get in the municipality of Port Hope for some of the larger spends that the county has. And in particular, I'm thinking about the largest line item is for public works in the county. What proportion of the spending of public works actually comes back into the municipality of Port Hope?
I need to do my best to keep track of all of them, and if I miss something, you'll let me know. So the first question is a good one. I mean, I certainly can't speak, for the province. Obviously, our residents do attend the schools, so there's certainly some correlation. There's certainly correlation there. How the overall education system is funded outside of the levy that we raise, I can't speak to that or why that was set up. But it is certainly a good question and not something everyone always thinks about when they're paying their property taxes, that it's a portion of this is going towards schools. The second question is in terms of the county overall levy. So the county levy is just shy of $80 million. So 15.3 million of that comes from Port Hope, which makes up about 19.2%. You had asked for a comparison. So Cobourg has the largest share at almost 24%. Then we would have Brighton, Hamilton Township, and Trent Hills around the 13-14%, so slightly lower than Port Hope. And then Cranmey and Alma-Colman pay a lesser amount than that. And I feel like I'm forgetting the last question. Sorry.
One is I was wondering, given that where we're sitting in terms of the overall tax contributions to the tax levy, what is the value for money that we're getting across all the spending that county does, and in particular in those areas where the most spending is done, whether or not we have any comparisons of whether or not we're getting for lack of a better word, bang for our buck.
No, it's an understandable question, right? So what we know is we're contributing $15.3 million to the net levy. There's obviously, just like our levy, there's other revenues that are already factored in to be able to reduce that. The challenge comes, is that you can't really know. It's not necessarily about how much is spent within our geographic area. Certainly there's county roads within our geographic area, but the services that are provided, are more than just what's provided ultimately within our borders. So first, that'd be more a question for, the county, but I'd have to note that the county finance team wouldn't, immediately be able to pull those numbers together either, because there's certainly, depending on how they track, but I doubt they track how much, the road work, maybe on capital, they could do it from one municipality to the next. But they wouldn't be tracking, how much salt gets used in Port Hope, or hours towards winter snow clearing in Port Hope compared to, to Hamilton Township or somewhere else. And then certainly there's all the more overhead or more general, costs that, go to benefit the entire county, right? So, at the end of the day, I come back to, the county allocates their taxes the same way we have to, which is as the province, determines based on the overall, assessment of properties, throughout the county. So it's an interesting question. Unfortunately, not one that I can answer though.
Thank you. Councillor Less.
Just backtracking to Councillor Mink's question regarding percentages. If we gave you a percentage, it doesn't apply to everybody. Okay, so if your house last year you paid $5,000 in municipal taxes, that 178 would be 3.5%. If you paid 6,000, that 178 would be 2.9%. So what are we really giving you when we give you a figure of 3.5 or 2.9? I'd rather give you the $178 number plus or minus 6% because it came in at 190. So $178, and you pay your taxes with money, not with percentages.
Thank you, Councillor Less. Did you want to respond or add anything further to that, Director Baxter?
I fully understand the question around percentages. I use them quite a bit. The challenge, the challenge with them is, the reason we moved away from the percentages after discussion with council on it was because of all the misunderstanding that was being, created around those percentages. If we look at the typical residential home and we identify the dollar value, then that is a simpler way to understand, the actual impact. Because when we talk about it at budget time, right, we're really at that point only looking at the municipal portion. We start focusing on the municipal portion, and then the public, most of the public, some absolutely will recognize that it's just one of the lines on their tax bill. Others, though, most, I don't know how much I pay in property taxes. Most probably don't, the majority of the time until they get their bill. But even if you do, and you turn around and you take and you add that percentage to your entire bill, right? It isn't a direct replication. As I just pointed out, this is at least second or third year where there hasn't been an increase in the education component. So if we talk about a percentage at that point in time, right? Some want to see it only on the municipal line. Some want to see it on the total, but most interpret it in terms of the total bill. So what we're trying to do is be able to ground that more in dollars so that, whether you like the percentage or not, I recognize no one wants an increase to the property taxes unless they're looking for an improved level of service, but then at least you're not hearing one percentage in the fall, which could be two different percentages. We have two municipal lines just on the tax bill. They each change at different percentages. And so there's a lot of challenge in terms of the percents. Percents can be much more easily manipulated than dollars and misunderstood. If we can talk in terms of true dollars, I'd much rather see us work and put the time, into something on the website that would help you put in, say, your property value per MPAC, that would then help give you maybe 178, is not as representative because your home isn't a typical home, right? Maybe it's much larger. Maybe it's a very small home. That I think would be a more valuable, tool than throwing out percentages and having people try and apply them. But at the end of the day, that was a change, that was made to address one thing. And it certainly helped to that extent. I understand that it also brought out those who want that percentage. But there is a challenge with, either approach. So,
Councillor Adam.
Thank you. So I just thought while we're talking about percentages, just to make it a little bit clearer for some people, because I've noticed online on Facebook that there's been multiple posts basically taking the municipal portion, the county portion, education, adding them all up and getting an outrageous number too, right? So I just wanted to clarify. So for the summary, in case anybody didn't read this, for the summary for the 2025 residential property tax, the municipal portion comes out to 3.9%, the county comes out to 2.0%, for a total of 5.9. So it wasn't like the 8 point whatever plus the 6 point whatever coming out. And I believe that that's what we're trying to do by changing it to the dollar amount, so that people didn't just kind of add up all the percentages and think that it's 15, 16, 20%, whatever. So just thought I'd make that note.
Absolutely. And that's why we included the table this year, so that you can see to the percentages and you can see how that adds up to the total percentage on the entire bill.
So, in fear of flogging this horse any further, if we continue working with the dollar figures in the fall and then coming up with more precise percentages when we have all the information, might we be able to provide more case examples of where folks land on the spectrum when the taxes are increased, so that we're not just talking about a typical, but those that fall below the typical and above the typical, so we have a number of case scenarios that people can see? That's a question.
Certainly we can.
And Councillor Adam.
Sorry, just one more thing. I forgot to bring this up. The new multi-res changing. I believe last year, did it go down by just 0.1, or did it go down by 0.2? Because it's supposed to, eventually they want to get it down to just equal to residential, correct?
That is correct. So previously, I actually had the same, it's been a while, so I had the same thought. Councillor, it went down by 0.2.
Oh, it was 0.2. Okay.
Last year as well. And I think we can anticipate likely the same. We'll reconsider, but we do provide some input. The county treasurers, or the treasurers within the county, do provide some input as well. Yes, it was 0.2 and anticipate another 0.2.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you for the report. Thank you for the questions and comments. The recommended motion is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? And that is passed. Thank you. At this point, we are going to recess for 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we're going to restart in just one moment. So we're going to start again by going back to item 4.7, report PRC 03525 update to the Parks, Recreation and Culture ICE allocation policy. And can I get the director to speak to this report before council considers it?
Certainly, thank you. So the current municipal ICE allocation policy was approved in March of 2017. And as recreation offerings continue to experience growth and participation, as well as ongoing dialogue with a number and various groups, staff initiated a review of this policy. Staff have consulted with ICE user groups, neighboring municipalities, who also are in a very similar situation as Port Hope, and use this information to inform the revisions that are included for your consideration this evening. The draft was also presented and discussed at length with the PRC Advisory Committee, who have supported and recommended this approval as well. The 2025 update includes administrative revisions adjustments to specific dates to align with our neighboring municipalities, the consideration of home centers for affiliated organizations, residency conversations, and registration data. And this is all intended to promote the fair and equitable distribution of ICE. As noted in the report, primetime ICE is at capacity, and staff are confident that the amended policy reverts away from historical use, which was how ICE was located previously, and the primary factor. The revisions to this policy, we hope will support the more inclusive and diverse approach to allocating ICE.
Thank you. I'm going to start off with a question because, as you know, Director, I've had a number of users of ICE time come and speak to me about when the new policy would come into play, and concerns have been raised about newer teams and organizations, in particular those that involve girls playing hockey and women's hockey leagues. And I'm just wondering how this new policy advances gender equality in our community in terms of access to ICE time and access to recreational facilities.
So thank you for the question. So although the policy doesn't address specific gender allocations or targets for allocations, meaning, this number of hours per ICE, it does adjust, again, as I mentioned, the historical, the current policy relies heavily on the historical use. So if one group had ICE last year, they have priority for that same ICE this year. With the adjustments, by identifying the desire and want to support perhaps new organizations or user groups that are coming in, the affiliated conversation that we had specifically with West Northumberland Girls Hockey Association does formalize that Port Hope is a home center for that association. So with recognizing that the whole pie has been served out, the revisions, I think, coming away from the historical use and promoting the more inclusive and offering availability it is new, will be something that we'll be working through. It also takes recognition from other associations and organizations that every year ICE allocation will be reviewed on a year-over-year basis, and they're not guaranteed that time based on other requests that might come forward.
Thank you for advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion in considering the new policy. And actually, maybe this is a good opportunity to ask when we might expect the EDI policy. I snuck that one in, CIO.
Without providing an exact date, I can state that the draft of the EDI policy is with staff for review. And so you should expect probably a report coming from the Human Resources Department. I would guess probably in the next month or so to be formalized by council.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Les. Oh, gosh, Adam. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I don't mind. Maybe it's a compliment. I just wanted to thank Eiley and Lisa for all the incredible work, and Julia for all the incredible work they've done bringing this forth. I think this is a very positive step forward, and looking forward to seeing it implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommended motion is in front of us. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Darrell, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item number 5, notice of motion, starting with 5.1, affirmative votes from each ward to budget issues, and that is being moved, forwarded by Councillor Toms, Councillor Darrell, and seconded by Councillor Clare, Councillor Holloway Woodwani. So, Councillor, would you like to speak to this? Councillor Toms, yeah.
Yeah, so after all the conversations we've talked about before and the legal opinions over double voting, now that we had some clarity, I wanted to kind of try to find a way forward when it comes to the budget. So I think this motion represents that way forward in a way that council can work together. I guess now adopting amendments to the budget as we move forward. And I think it promotes council to work together and kind of coming up with solutions for that. So I guess we'll read it, I guess. Or Claire, I think, wants to speak as well.
Yes, we can definitely put it up, and you just give us a second. We'll get it up on the screen. Yep. Did you want to speak to it?
Sure.
What,
Yeah,
well,
why
it's
not?
Before it's on the screen, or okay?
Yeah, it doesn't
Go
matter. I
ahead.
think fill the airtime. I just want to concur. I really appreciated the opportunity to work with Councillor Darrell on bringing this forward, and I think that given the legal opinion that no weighted vote does exist for budget, even if we are determined to keep the weighted votes in place, I think this approach will help ensure that the spirit of that amalgamation agreement is upheld and that the adoption of the annual budget reflects the interests of all parts of the community. I also really appreciate the potential of this proposed policy to encourage more of a consensus building approach to our deliberations around budget, essentially saying that it's on each member of council to request the changes to the proposed budget that would enable us to support it, as opposed to potentially just voting against it if it were without bringing forward solutions. However, it should be noted that this motion and this concept was crafted prior to our fully understanding the implications of strong mayors, or even being aware that strong mayors were going to be coming to Port Hope. So learning what we are about the implications of strong mayors, I now understand that council will no longer be voting to adopt the budget as a whole. And instead, we will be reviewing the budget as presented by the mayor and can only propose and vote on amendments. So as such, I'm now torn about this motion. Should we pass this anyway, at least setting a clear intention for how we think budget should be adopted, as in by a majority of council and with support from across the community? This would, of course, not in any way, this would be superseded by the provincial law and strong mayors, but it would set an intention. Or alternatively, Councillor Darrell and I do have some language prepared for a friendly amendment that would update the second to last paragraph to indicate that the affirmative vote from a council representative of each ward would apply to the votes on proposed amendments. And I think I'm interested in hearing from colleagues on that before moving forward with that friendly amendment. So I'm looking forward to hearing people's thoughts.
Okay, we'll start with Councillor Less.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I know that this motion was prepared before you had the opportunity to read the extensive report that the director provided to us. So that's an issue that you're pushing something forward that there was a lot of background material that was prepared. Perhaps you should have waited for that. And secondly, two councillors, if we pass it as this, two councillors in Ward 2 could say, theoretically, not taking away strong mayor's power, but could say, no, we're not happy with that, and hold up the vote of 5 others. So I find that a real problem. It's one budget, one municipality, one vote per councillor, the old way.
Thank you, Councillor Less. I think there's just one comment that I think is, or a context actually, that's probably worth reflecting on in terms of this is, if we think about the 3 last budgets that we had approved as council, in our first round of budgets of voting, we had a 5-2 vote with 1 urban and 1 rural councillor voting against the budget. In 2024, we actually did, I think, very much in the spirit of working through some of our concerns. There was an initial budget approval. It got taken back for a reduction in terms of the overall increase. And on that instance, there was an urban councillor and a mayor working with a rural councillor to bring back a revised budget, which I'd like to remind everybody we passed unanimously at this table through that process of deliberation and cooperation. Then, of course, we know this year it was a 3-2 vote. I just provide that for context to say I think it's always been the intention around the table to have those deliberations and discussions, and we certainly have evidence of that happening at this council table. But just picking up on your last point here, I would like to turn it over to the clerk to say, you know, what are the policy options that we have in front of us right now in relation to this particular motion?
So thank you, Madam Mayor, for asking that question. So thank you, Madam Mayor, for asking that question. It's a very, very important question. The Director of Corporate Services provided a bit of an overview of the implications of strong mayor powers on weighted voting. And, you know, he stressed the gravity of that legislation and the implications of that. I would like to reiterate that gravity. This is provincial legislation that has changed the municipal landscape. It gives the mayor certain powers that they can choose to delegate, but it gives them certain powers that they cannot delegate. And budget creation is one of those powers. So in the situation such as this, a budget adoption policy would not be applicable, only because council will no longer have the ability to approve a budget. It will be the mayor bringing forward a budget. Council will have the option of making amendments to that budget, and if the amendments are accepted by the mayor, then the budget is deemed adopted. So there's no longer a vote, and this is something that is required for the mayor to do, and as per the legislation. So that is why I note that, you know, Councillor Toms wanted to bring forward some sort of an amendment to speak to that, and I would encourage that, only because the last two paragraphs really wouldn't apply with strong mayor powers.
So can I just follow up my question to you, and maybe this is more of a question to both the mover and seconder. I do know that we are going to be getting some very formal training around what this new legislation is in the first week of June. And just for the record, nobody here in the municipality of Port Hope asked for strong mayor powers. That is absolutely the truth. And nobody knew that this was going to be coming from the province. But what's also true is that we have to fully understand what this is going to mean for the municipality and for our decision making moving forward. And I do not take that lightly, nor do I think the staff takes this lightly. And so I like the spirit in which this is brought forward, but I wonder if we can defer looking at this until we have the fulsome training and education, so we can see what we can put into place to continue this commitment of cooperation that we want to be seeing in our decision making. Councillor Clare.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily opposed to that suggestion. I did want to provide a couple of comments, though, that, you know, first, the Councillor Darrell and I did consult very closely with the clerk prior to bringing forward this particular wording of the motion to ensure that we were bringing forward something that could be done. Our original wording was something that could not be done. So this is already a much revised version. But I think, you know, I want to just remind us as well that we have lots of policies that are internal to the municipality of Port Hope that would be superseded by other laws and provincial mandates. So, you know, policies, just because a policy would be superseded by a provincial law does not mean that we can't pass a policy stating our intent. Of course, you know, we could have the intent that that's how we want to pass budgets. The mayor, whoever is in that chair at the time, would hopefully consider that intent in determining how they approach the budget. But of course, it would be superseded by the rules provided by the province. So I just wanted to say that. And I think the reason I appreciate that it is hard to make these kinds of decisions, I think it's going to be a long time before we fully understand the implications of strong mayors. I think the training will go a long way towards that. But to a certain extent, we're not navigating uncharted territories for a small community like ours. And so we're constantly going to be getting caught up in, does this make sense, or should we wait until we know more? And I'm not sure that we want to get too concerned about that. We can always update things later as we go. And the reason, of course, that we brought forward this motion on today's agenda is because we knew the report around weighted voting was coming through. We did consult with senior staff about what that might look like, what some of the legal advice was. So we wanted to make sure that we were putting something on the agenda today so that everybody understands that we are having these conversations about how do we ensure equitable representation within these changing contexts. And that's why it's on today's agenda.
And just to respond to that, I don't disagree with the intent. I'm just saying, if you want to have the most teeth and the best positioned policy, because that is the spirit of this council, why would you not want to do it with the fulsome education and background to what the context in which we're working? Because you could be using, an approach that could be more fine-tuned and be better suited after we get all of the information. And so I'm not suggesting that we vote this down. I'm just saying, could we defer this for a few weeks until we get the training, revisit it, and see whether or not there's an opportunity to better position it or fine-tune the language around this to better suit the reality of the context? Councillor Todd.
Thanks very much. And mine is more of a comment and a thank you. What I appreciate about this motion, regardless of where we go with it tonight, Councillor Darrell, thank you, and Councillor Clare, thank you. The intention and spirit of this is collaboration. And, this council, I think, has done a very good job, as the mayor pointed out in prior budgets, to collaborate over it. It's not to say that all councils will. And so the spirit in which it came forward was, how can we make sure that we are bringing together all the communities so that we have something that's put forward that is in the best interest of Port Hope. So regardless of where this goes, the fact that it's here, I think, is very important and valuable because the intention is there. If it ends up becoming symbolic, and it's still an important nod to the importance that council has placed on collaboration. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and thank you for that comment, Councillor Todd, because I agree, and thank you to both Claire and Darrell for bringing this forward. When I read this, I kind of went away and came back from vacation, and I was like, "What's this?" There was no talk of any of these motions before I left, so it was a little bit of a surprise. I think that the recommendation to defer, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think there's two. When you look at the next notice of motions coming along as well, it almost makes this one potentially null and void as well. So considering Strong Mayors Act, considering the other motions that could be coming forward, it's almost like, do we defer it, or do we just kind of say no and keep it on the shelf and bring it back when it's more, in a way that's more applicable, something that maybe the amendments to the budget, maybe there's something we could work with there. I don't know. I just don't feel like we have enough right now.
Councillor Clare.
I'm going to defer to Councillor Darrell on the deferment issue. I will just weigh in to say I would much prefer deferment versus voting it down today, because that would preclude Councillor Darrell and I from bringing this forward again based on that information. And even if it was to change the language slightly, we'd have to be careful about bringing it forward again.
And just because I was the one that raised deferment, I'm not talking about deferment into 6 months from now, 8 months from now. I'm just suggesting until the education session and the training happen at the beginning of June. So we're really just talking about a number of weeks, which would give the potential for maybe some further, you've made some language adjustments already, even more precise language adjustments so that it can stand as tightly aligned with what our new reality is as possible.
Yeah, I would be okay with deferring it until after we get the training.
Councillor Clare.
This is a question for you. In terms of deferment, so if we're having, the training session is planned for June 1st, right? Would we be comfortable deferring this to committee of the whole in June, recognizing that would only be 2 days later? So we wouldn't have had a great deal of time to digest that training, or would council be preferring to defer it to the committee of the whole in July?
I see the clerk is
Yeah.
wanting to speak, so please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I do want to point out actually that the training has been scheduled for June 3rd, which is the same night as the Committee of the Whole. And yeah, so the training is a public meeting. So everyone is allowed to attend. It is up to council as to how they wish to proceed, but you may defer this until July, or you may defer it until the June council meeting and have that discussion at council.
Councillor Adam.
Well, considering this would be something for the budget, I don't think it would really matter if we deferred it to July because it would still be more than enough time to implement it anyway. So,
Councillor Darrell, are you comfortable with?
I think July makes the most sense, being how the training's on the same day as our committee meeting.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in terms of, Councillor Clare.
We may be about to ask the same question. I would just, before we vote on a deferment to July, I just want to recognize that we have committee of the whole in July. That would mean it's not passed by council until August. Would that, no?
The council meeting, there's only one council meeting.
Right,
Yeah,
sorry.
So you would be able to pass it. at
Okay,
the meeting.
so then if we defer to July, okay, so that's another implication, right? Because if we defer to July, we're not deferring to committee of the whole. We're deferring directly to council, which means one vote, which means we deliberate once and vote once on the matter, as opposed to June where we would have committee of the whole 2 weeks and then council again.
But yes and no, because we're having a pretty fulsome discussion and deliberation around this. I think what we're talking about here, if I understand the conversation correctly, is that we're agreeing with the spirit in which this is brought forward, that what we're just seeking is some clarification on what does that mean in the context of the new legislation. So it wouldn't be a brand new item that would just be, making things uncomfortable in terms of deliberations. Back to the clerk. How can we move this forward then? Do we need a new motion then from Councillor Toms? Do we just have him move the deferment just so that we're following the right process?
Yes, we would need to have a motion to defer with a mover and seconder.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to defer this until the council meeting in July.
And Councillor Clare, are you comfortable seconding that? Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, and that is passed. Moving on to the next item, and before we do so, I'm going to turn the chair over to the Deputy Mayor.
Okay. So the next item is 5.2, ward boundary and council composition review. This is moved by Councillor Attridge and seconded by Mayor Hankinski. Do you want me to read it out, or are we going to put it up on the board? Okay. Okay, well, we'll wait till it's up. Right. Okay. Whereas there are increasing community concerns regarding the current balance of representation across the wards, and whereas a comprehensive and impartial review will support fair and effective representation, strengthen democratic processes, and ensure council's structure continues to reflect the needs of the community, and whereas Watson and Associates Economists Limited has a proven and legally informed framework for conducting electoral structure reviews, including ward boundary reviews, council composition assessments, and an examination of the deputy mayor's role, and incorporates public consultation as a core component of its methodology. Now, therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to engage Watson and Associates Economists Limited to undertake a ward boundary review and council composition review, including a review of the deputy mayor's role, with the objective of ensuring the municipality's governance structure remains representative and effective, and that in accordance with the municipality's procurement policy, council authorize a single source procurement under Section 2E, recognizing that Watson and Associates Economists Limited possesses unique expertise and proven legal methodology in electoral structure reviews, which is critical to achieving a fair, effective, and legally defensible outcome. And that staff be directed to execute a contract with Watson and Associates Economists Limited no later than May 30th, 2025, and to allocate a budget of up to $80,000 for the completion of this work, and that an additional budget of up to $75,000 be allocated to engage temporary or contract resources and other staff needs, recognizing that the scope and complexity of this review will place a significant strain on existing staff capacity, and that additional support is required to ensure timely project delivery and that continued fulfillment of other municipal priorities, and that an additional budget of up to $25,000 be allocated for development and implementation of a comprehensive community communication and education plan to inform residents about changes to ward boundaries and council composition, should council adopt such changes for implementation in the 2026 municipal election, with the understanding that these funds will not be required if the changes are deferred to a future election. And that council approve the use of the municipality's growth readiness fund to finance the total project budget, including the consultant engagement, the additional staffing resources, and the community communication and education plan required to complete the review, and that the final report and recommendations from Watson and Associate Economists Limited be presented to council for consideration as soon as
These motions. Like we either made the conclusion that this is the way we're going, or we're going to open it up and let the consultants decide and take this off the table until we know where we're going with the ward alignment.
Thank you. I just want to give everybody a chance to speak first before we start having rebuttal. Is there anyone else? Daryl.
Yeah, I just want to say I fully support the ward boundary review. I think if the last 25 years have told us anything, it needs to be looked at as far as the neighbors and how that goes. I'm just worried that we're going to be rushing it to try to get it across the finish line for 2026. I would be more comfortable supporting it for 2030 when we've had the chance, like, to get it, everything done in time instead of trying to ram it through for 26.
Thank you. Actually, I would just like to make a comment first before we have a second comment. So I agree with Daryl. So both of these motions have been topics that I had conversations last term, as well as very early with many members here in this term, especially when we were discussing deputy mayor. And to me, that was the time to have these discussions because it gave this term of council and staff a long time to figure out what we're going to do. I feel right now, the May 30th deadline, I think, I don't understand why that's there. We have a new CAO coming. I would prefer that senior leadership and the CAO be able to weigh in on this. Boundary changes is not just who we're voting in. There's a finance component to it. There's a corporate services component. There's potential planning with zoning changes. works and engineering. There's water and wastewater considerations. We have rural and urban roads crews. So there's a lot that needs to be considered, not just who we're going to vote in for each boundary. So I think that this council, like I said, April 22nd, we had strategic planning. There was no discussion about this just like 12 days ago. And then all of a sudden we're pushing this through, and I don't seem to understand. I cannot grasp why we're doing this now and not a couple years ago. Whereas, Councilor Chad.
So I appreciate the comments from both you, and I would like to mitigate your fear. I spoke with Watson's. We talked about the timelines. One of the things that I enjoyed about Watson Associates when I was chatting with them is the process is the process. It's not a rushed process. It's not a compressed process. It's not a let's get it done as quickly as possible. In fact, they warned me that if we were to change the process or compress it or turn it into something that it's not, it would fail. The province would not accept it. So I asked them, if we were to start and we just followed your process the way it is, would it fulfill in order for the 2026 election? And they said it could. And what the could is as we go through the process and the community consultation, and if there happens to be an appeal process, it very well could get elongated, in which case it would not be able to be adopted until the 2030 election. However, if we go through the process and it goes through and there's, an adoption by the community and council and everything goes according to their schedule, we could have it in place in 2026 and it would not be rushed or cutting corners or doing it. So none of that exists simply because from their point of view, the process is the process. So they will follow the same process they do for every other municipality. We would be able to have the time in order to get it, all the concerns you have, Deputy Mayor, around all the fulsome what ifs. We would have the time to be able to do that in time for the election of 2026. So the consultants themselves are saying, listen, if you're willing to go in, yes, you could come through this and have it ready for 2026. And if you don't, the work's done and you'll have it in time for 2030. So I would encourage everyone not to be afraid. The consultants themselves have simply said, if you allow us to do our process, we will do it in the pace that we're meant to do, and we will make sure that it follows all the needs of the province and the community.
Thank you for that, Mayor Hinkes.
And just to follow up, whilst you talked to the consultants, I actually talked to Trent Hills and asked them about their process, and it was really the same story. Is that in some ways this is it's a technical process on one level. On the other hand, it does have that very fulsome community engagement piece of it that has to be done well and in a meaningful way. But both from the consultant side and actually from a municipality in our own community, the message was absolutely the same, that it is not too short of a period to try to engage in moving this kind of process forward. And I would say that had there been an interest and intention about this review earlier in this term by anybody on this council, we could have been contemplating moving forward earlier on this at any point.
Thank you. So for the record, I did have conversations with many people up here, and I didn't get a seconder. So there was those discussions, but go ahead, Councillor Claire.
Thank you again. I echo. I think this is a great thing to do. It's been 25 years, and I think it's good to review these kinds of things comprehensively now and again. But I also think, as you said, this is actually feels timely to me, given the ongoing conversations we're having about equity and balancing the interests of diverse neighborhoods and hamlets that make up our community. I also have a concern about timing. I appreciate everything you've said. I think my concern is more around recognizing that the perception of something in this case is going to be almost as important as the thing itself, right? That, I think we can all appreciate, right? If the process does not feel legitimate and is not trusted and beyond reproach, we could find ourselves here 25 years ago having ongoing discussions about whether it was fair. So with that in mind, I really want to make sure that we do this in a way that is beyond reproach for everyone, not just the province, not the appeals process, not just staff, not just council, but also the community as a whole. And I also did check in with Trent Hills, and I noted that their process took about 9 months to complete, but it was also completed 2 years before the next election. Because that's the other piece of it, right? Is if we were to complete it, fine, the process, that's one thing, but that only leaves 10 months to fully change our electoral system to align with any potentially board boundary changes. People are thinking about running for office. I'm not sure that it allows the time on the other side, if that makes sense, of adopting recommendations. But then again, I'm quite happy to be surprised if it in fact works that way. So just with that reflection, I wonder if the mover and seconder of this motion would consider recognizing that Watson is going to do what they're going to do, regardless of the timeline we put in this motion. What if we were to remove the reference to the 2026 election and simply say no later than the 2030 election? Because they're going to do things at what they consider to be the correct pace anyway. And then it just removes any of that fear or concern that I think us and others might have when they read that reference to 2026.
Sorry. So I'll just weigh in. I agree with you 100%. And that's the what I was trying to communicate, is that even though they potentially could do it before the next election, it's just like when council decides that the remuneration for council, we don't decide it for ourselves at the end of term. It's done for the next council. So bringing this in before this council, I just think it doesn't appear right. So I would agree with yourself, but I have a question about the May 30th deadline as well. That's in a couple weeks. So I would like to know why May 30th? Why could that not be later if we're letting this go until potentially 2030?
Well, exactly that. It was, as it was written, was we were going to let the process happen so that it could be done by 2026. We wanted to give them as much time as possible. The deadline on May 30th is simply to call them and engage them. So there's not a lot of process ahead of time. So 2 weeks to make the phone call. And I appreciate, Councillor Clare, what you're saying about taking that out. The one thing I would just raise for consideration is, that line actually talks about and to implement any approved changes prior to, which is really over to us to do. So yes, it could be no later than the 2030, but then the implementation of it disappears. I feel
Implementing a strategic plan, which makes me feel like already we're putting that to the back burner. We've got $180,000 here, and we've got dates here, and we're deciding this up here. My comfort level is to have our staff tell us what is a reasonable timeline and what is a reasonable budget. So in theory, I would support this, but with those specifics in there, I can't support it at this time. Go ahead, Mayor.
Councillor Mink, I think that you assume that we didn't talk to staff about this, and so there were some discussions, as there are with all motions coming forward, where there is communication with staff on the matters. So just as a matter of record, to make sure that we've got that on the table. And again, back to the timelines. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we haven't heard from Councillor Lester, we haven't heard from Councillor Adam as part of this conversation. But again, I think that the timelines that Councillor Todd had included in his motion were not necessarily timelines that were created out of nothing. They were very much informed by the conversation that he had with Watson's, which is the only firm that conducts these processes in terms of ward boundary reviews. And so I think those are really important things to put forward.
Thank you. And I see Councillor Adam with his arm.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I'd just wait a little bit before I chimed in. I like this. This is in my personal opinion, the proper way of doing things. That you actually go out and you get a fulsome review, you get the public consultation, and you do things properly. We do it for zoning amendments. We do the same thing on something as simple as a COM 3 to a Res 1. We go through this process. I think this process is something that is very much needed. I think it's something that it makes sense. I'm not worried about the wording at all, as the wording does say that it's presented to council for consideration as soon as possible with sufficient time to implement it. So if there's not sufficient time to implement it, it doesn't get implemented until the next one. So I'm not really worried about your wording. I think the wording is great. I think that you guys have done a fantastic job on that, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to weigh in? No? Okay, Councillor Les. Thank you. So I'm actually, maybe popular opinion, I'm going to actually ask for a recorded vote on this, if you wouldn't mind, Clerk. And okay, last comment, Councillor Clare.
I actually would like to propose an amendment for consideration, ideally for consideration by the mover and seconder. And that is that the last two lines of the motion be removed and replaced with, this would be as soon as, what is that word? Practical. I think it's practical. Practical, comma. So those last two lines be replaced with, and that staff be directed to implement any approved changes prior to the next election. Or maybe something even more clear, that the next election, or the election, the next election after the approved changes. I just, whether that's 2026 or 2030, it would apply, right?
If I could just weigh in on the last part there. I think the initial part with respect to replacing the wording to make that clear that there's an intention for this to carry over if it's not done for 2026 can be clear enough, but staff being directed to implement those changes, this will very much be subject to a council decision. The end result of the process would be typically a consultant coming back and making recommendations to council to consider a variety of options. Council very much would have to.
Sorry, that's why I said approved changes, as in the changes having been approved by council.
I think that's fair. I think that approval for staff would be provided at the time of considering the changes, if that makes sense.
Okay, is that captured what you want, Councillor Clare? Councillor Les.
Why do we go through this process ad nauseum, where we have a perfectly good notice of motion that outlines our intent, and then we go down and we start wordsmithing it, and that adds nothing to the motion?
It says that staff be directed to implement any approved changes prior to the next election. And that was proposed by Deputy Clare, or sorry, Councillor Clare. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Toms. So I'll just call a vote for the amendment. All in favor? Okay, so that's defeated, right? Okay, so I think we've talked about this a lot. Is everybody ready to go ahead with the final vote? Okay, so I'll pass it over to the clerk.
Thank you very much. So Deputy Mayor Mink has requested a recorded vote with respect to the second notice of motion that is on the agenda regarding ward and council composition review. So in line with section 53 of the procedure bylaw, I will ask each council member whether they vote yes or no on this particular matter. We will start with Councillor Andrews. Councillor Attridge.
Yes.
Councillor Holloway Wadhwani.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Mink.
No.
Councillor Pearson.
Yes.
Councillor Toms.
Yes.
Mayor Hempkowski.
Yes, in the spirit of moving quickly for once, yes.
So that's a total of 6 yes votes and 1 no vote. The motion passes.
And I'll pass 5.3 back over to the mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5.3, change council composition to directly elect deputy mayor, and that's brought forward by Councillor Darrell Toms and seconded by Councillor Claire Holloway Wadhwani. Would either one of you like to speak to this motion?
Yeah, I just want to say that this motion was worked on around the same time this other one come into play. It was just a way of looking at, we hear a lot about representation inequities in both wards. So it was a way of electing a deputy mayor at large, which would potentially give Ward 2 the ability to elect their deputy mayor, which would then let them have 3 representatives at the table. That was the purpose of this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Darrell. Councillor Claire.
Yeah, again, for context, I think this is one that Daryl and I started talking about in the fall, like after the first Canton Town Hall meeting. So this has been in the works for a long time, long before we were aware something around ward boundaries would be coming forward on the same agenda, long before we knew that strong mayors was coming. But it is something that we felt responded to concerns and was a potential solution to some of the concerns that we've all been hearing from the rural community. So, it's on the agenda. I know, Councillor Les, you mentioned it. These are weird to have them all 3 on the agenda, but I think, that's testament to there's a lot of thinking going on around potential solutions, and they all ended up on the same agenda, so be it. So I did want to speak to why I think this is a good idea, and then obviously I'm interested to hear what my colleagues have to say about this, given the decision we've just made on the previous motion. But initially it appealed to me because of the potential to provide rural residents with more representation while still retaining a similar council composition. The idea being that an elected at-large deputy mayor is another person who would be sitting at this table who has to earn votes in the rural community and therefore understand rural issues and be accountable to rural residents in a way that we're all supposed to be and we all try to be, but in a way that maybe feels more legitimate. That said, I've been thinking a lot about this motion for the last couple of weeks in the context of strong mayors. And it also occurs to me that this is something we may want to consider if this ward boundary review is not going to be complete in time for 26, as something that we bring forward as an interim measure for the 2026 election, for its potential with regards to helping us in the context of strong mayors. I think just generally, given the increased demands on the mayor's role that we have recognized already in the changes we made to the procedural bylaw that beefs up the deputy mayor role a little bit, I think it is fair to assume that not everyone who gets elected to council is going to be prepared to step into the deputy mayor role with those additional time commitments and that. And given additional commitments around being the public face and making speeches and that in stepping in for the mayor, it's not something that we all necessarily would want to do or are comfortable with. We also did do some public engagement around the deputy mayor role as part of our procedural bylaw review and determined at that time that we were going to defer our deliberations as a council about the deputy mayor role. But the feedback we did get through that existing public engagement was clear that the public does not support our rotating deputy mayor system. So I think it's likely that we would be having this conversation at some point about what that looks like anyway. I think with the strong mayor, context of strong mayors, I also see some potential for an elected deputy mayor with the same community-wide mandate as the mayor. An elected deputy mayor could be seen as a legitimate counterbalance. On the one hand, potentially providing strong endorsement for decisions should they be aligned with the mayor's position and allowing us to feel comfortable with the application of strong mayor powers should they ever be used in that case. And on the flip side, if not aligned with the mayor, their dissent could be an important force in galvanizing public engagement or council alignment to overturn a veto or strong mayor decision where there was no majority support. And I think it's worth considering that having another leader at this table that is viewed as equally legitimate and representative of the whole community, could this help address fears or concerns around unchecked authority? My only concern right now is obviously we have just determined to undergo a more comprehensive process with relation to council composition, which it would include looking at the deputy mayor. And we don't know, we can't predict what that process is going to come back for. But I do think it was worth raising, and I would be interested to hear what other members of council think of the proposal.
Councillor Less.
I think it's a good proposal. Nothing wrong with it, except the cart's in front of the horse. Okay, let's go through the consultation process and get that straight, as opposed to making this change and then potentially another change, because we could end up with 6 wards. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So this is a topic that I have always advocated for. I think that as you started out by saying if there was an elected deputy mayor, potentially Ward 2 could have 4 representations if they voted for mayor, deputy mayor, and 2 councillors. But more than that, I lost my train of thought. One of the first topics after the election happens is who is going to be the deputy mayor. And that never comes up during the campaign, ever, never. And the community has an idea, the person with the most votes. Well, that's always going to be a Ward 1 person over a Ward 2 because it's times 4 votes and there's more people. So, and I believe that our roles here are almost becoming full-time. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm completely over my time. I don't have a lot of it. So a deputy mayor role could potentially be a more full-time role to offset some of that responsibility from the other councillors. And it just gives, the other problem I find with council choosing is that council is choosing potentially a Ward 1 or Ward 2 representation for deputy mayor that the other half of the community didn't choose. They had no choice in it. So I just feel right now the way we're doing it, not great, but now this is almost null and void because the other motion passed. But thank you for bringing it forward.
And I just I want to just weigh in and say I very much support this idea. I think it's actually long overdue for the municipality of Port Hope. But going back to the comments of Councillor Mink and Councillor Less about the process and the steps, I think it's also very true that the elected deputy mayor position has emerged in other municipalities after the ward or as part of the ward review process so that we have a better sense of all the different pieces of the puzzle. It happened that way in Trent Hills. It happened that way in Essex County more recently. So absolutely in support of the idea, but would like to see it contemplated as part of the ward boundary review. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. I like the motion. I think the spirit of it and the idea behind it is solid. I think also in light of some of the concerns that council has shared around should the other one not get completed by 2026, if it moves into 2030, this would be one to bring forward as a carryover, because I think the bones of it are rock solid. But similar to what Councillor Lass had said earlier, the other one having been put forward, then this can be something that, in the event that, right.
Assuming that Vicky's chairing, but so it's back to me. So I'll take a comment from you, Claire, and then I just want to weigh in on one other point.
Sorry. My mic will no longer turn on. Oh, there's a switch. Sorry, I'm not sure how that happened. Okay, so I will tip my hand a little bit. So when these were on the agenda, there's two different things. One, the previous motion fails, in which case this is makes sense to contemplate for 2026. Given that motion is passed, what I would like to propose that we do, and again I will defer to Councillor Darrell to ensure he's supportive of that, is that we find out from staff how long staff would need to be able to implement an elected at large deputy mayor change for 2026, and that we defer this motion to that point of time, and where we can assess what progress has been made on the council the fulsome review, and whether that's likely to be completed in time for 2026 or not, and we could revisit it at that date.
And just to add one point to this, just going back to the conversation we had a lot around the last motion and your concerns about perception and process and engagement and being rushed, I think the same principles absolutely apply to this, because we're talking about changing council composition, and we should have a fulsome engagement process with the public. So the same kind of principles that I would hope would be applied to the motion that we passed should also be applied to this as well.
Can I ask for clarification on what that process would be? Because so currently in our procedural bylaw, council chooses how the deputy mayor is selected. When we made the changes to how we were going to select the deputy mayor at the beginning of our term, we simply made that decision. There was no broad engagement process of that. We did include questions and that around the deputy mayor role in our comprehensive review of the procedural bylaw. So we have public engagement consultation data on that, including a lot of write-in answers saying elect the deputy mayor, elect the deputy mayor. Again, and I realize I may have a different comfort because I've been sitting with this since the fall, and I've had so many conversations about it, which I feel confident in bringing forward that this is support, would have support from the community. So I guess I'm curious, what would you need that process to look like? Because that will also impact at what time we bring this motion forward again.
Well, I don't disagree with getting some parameters from staff around what is realistic timing, and I think it's also realistic to have a further conversation about what that process should look like and what kind of input and information all of us should have in making that decision, which is changing the composition of council.
So when it comes to review of council compensation, the previous motion has already provided direction to staff with respect to what that looks like. So I would need some time to think through what something like this would look like, because if you're already giving me direction on conducting a review, and then at the same time telling me that, make the change, right? So that's where staff would need some clarification. With respect to the question that Councillor Holloway Wadhwani has asked in terms of when the item can come forward for consideration, it is really hard for me to answer that question, Councillor Claire, because I don't know how long the process with Watson and Associates is going to take. I mean, there is a possibility that that process may extend to January, February. I mean, people are away during the summer months, and that could be a factor. So it's just very hard for me to answer that question. Yeah.
Okay, so given the discussion we've had around the table, I'm going to go back to the mover and seconder and see what you would like to do in relation to the motion. Anything?
I think right now I'd just like to withdraw it.
Councillor Claire?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then, given that we wouldn't know what date to put on a deferral, and we can continue to consult with staff on that around when it may be appropriate to bring that forward and in what form.
Okay, thank you for the conversation and the really fulsome comments and debate on all three of these motions that have been in front of us. Moving on then to item number 6, updates and new business. Starting with 3852 Ganaraska Road Development, following a 3-day hearing in September 2024, the Ontario Land Tribunal dismissed an appeal by Snow Owl Woods Holding Inc., Mistral Land Development Inc. on April 14th, 2025, concerning a proposed residential development at 3852 Ganaraska Road. The tribunal found insufficient evidence regarding potential impacts on a nearby area of natural and scientific interest, the ANSI, and ruled the applications were inconsistent with the 2024 provincial policy statement. The developer has filed a notice of motion for leave for appeal with the Ontario Divisional Court, which will be reviewed in writing. The municipality is working with legal counsel on the motion materials and will share information as it is available. So we are now in the stage where the applicant has filed a notice of motion for leave to appeal with the Ontario Divisional Court, and we are working with legal staff on a response to that. Second item is the transit fee suspension for in-town routes. Starting May 5th, 2025, the municipality of Port Hope reinstated free transit on routes A and B, as well as the rules accessible service to support Phase 3 of the Walton Street Reconstruction Project. This initiative aims to ease travel, support local businesses, and promote sustainable transportation. Regular fares still apply to Route C. That's the Cobourg Express shuttle, and residents with May Transit passes can use them once fares resume. For schedules and updates, visit porthope.ca/transit, or you can call 905-885-9891. And here's a really exciting piece of news around our pump track. We're building a new pump track and want your input. Join us for a community open house on Thursday, May 8th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Town Park Recreation Center. Pump track is a fun, inclusive, looped circuit for bikes, scooters, skateboards, and wheelchairs, anything really with wheels on it, designed to build momentum through body movement and not pedaling. So thanks to a $200,000 grant from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, the project was inspired by strong community support. Now we need your feedback to help shape the final design, and you can take the survey also at engage.porthope.ca/pump/track. Now, before I move on to question period, do councillors have any other updates that they would like to share? I see a number. I'm going to start on the right and move on to the left. So, Councillor Clare.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that we hosted our very first, hopefully first annual Port Hope Sustainability Expo. It was held at Port Hope High School last Sunday. And I just wanted to express my appreciation for all of the community members that contributed to the event. We had 25 community groups and local businesses participate as exhibitors, including our 2 local car dealerships who participated in an electric vehicle showcase, and particular mention to Joshua Noiseau from Evermeadow Farms for his really informative talk around regenerative agriculture, to Paul Burnham for his very passionate presentation around the importance of protecting farmland in Port Hope and across the county, and to staff from the Works and Engineering Department and members of the Environmental Advisory Committee for a really cool presentation looking at green infrastructure options. The event was organized by the Environmental Advisory Committee, which are, community volunteers. And so I really want to thank them for their efforts, and I hope you'll all join us next year.
Thank you for that, and congratulations for that very important event. And hopefully, we'll just go from strength to strength on building on that. Yes.
Thank you. So what Councillor Clare was just saying there, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend it as I was doing a Rotary cleanup. So we had a community cleanup at the same time. So we were walking around town picking up garbage in all the different locations, which we ended up, I don't know, we're probably somewhere around 50 bags of garbage. So our trails look nice. So I wanted to talk about a couple of different things. If you've been at the Jack Burger Sports Complex Thursday evenings, there is a new program which is roller skating, which is pretty exciting. I don't think that maybe the director would know better, but I don't think we've had that for quite some time in this area, and it's really nice to see. I know that some of my staff are now doing it and they're loving it, and I just bought new rollerblades to join in for this Thursday. And then the one other thing that I wanted to bring up is on Thursday, we had an incredible night. We had our Port Hope Civic Awards. And if you were in attendance, you would have seen how awesome this event really was. A lot of credit to Jeannie Maidens. She has done an incredible job with all the different work that she's done for that, as well as Cheryl, a newer person into the events, and she stepped right up and was incredible. On top of that, the different volunteers of the Civic Awards Committee, they volunteer a lot of their time to put together that awards. So I just wanted to congratulate a few people. I'm going to congratulate one individual that's in here right now, as I see Ed White over there, as he received an award, as well as our outstanding youth, Morgan Kruger, and our outstanding citizen, Bill Hubbs.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. And I think I speak to everybody who was in attendance that our Citizen of the Year had everybody in tears with a very moving tribute to his late wife, and how they really worked together for the betterment of the community. And certainly I had a hard time getting through my final comments because his words touched me very, very profoundly. Any other updates from around the council table? Okay, seeing none, we'll now move on to question period. So it's now time for question period, and the purpose of question period is to make inquiries of council members related to matters of municipal business. Please note, it's not meant to be an avenue to ask questions to staff. If you have any questions specifically to your council members, you can ask them now. And I also want to highlight that if your questions are operational in nature, they may be best answered by a member of staff following the meeting. Contact information for all of our directors and senior staff are available by the door. And if you do have operational questions, please ensure that you contact them, or that we can take your questions and pass them on to the relevant director. And when you do come up to the microphone, we ask that you please identify your name and ensure that the purple button is pushed and the microphone is on before speaking. So just before we get to to questions from the public, I'll just ask, are there any questions from around the table from councillors before we begin? Seeing none. We'll now, and we don't have media with us, we keep hoping, but unless that something changes drastically, that's not going to happen. So we'll now open it up to the public.
Hi, Ed White, Mill Street. I have a couple of questions here about the hypothetical boundary changes and whatnot that may or may not occur. I'm just wondering if this came up, there's a couple of questions going to be related to this, if you'll bear with me. Is the Wesleyville thing have anything to do with what has been proposed, or why this was brought up at this time? As for 25 years, it's been fine. The other thing I'm curious about, we've got the talk about the electing the deputy mayor and the changes sort of that it makes to the council representative here. It was, if you can clear it up in my head, it was said, I think, that you would follow the recommendations of the group that's doing the study on this. What if they come out with something like municipality of Port Hope should have 4 wards instead of 2 wards? Like, we're all thinking, oh, well, maybe you're going to kick this boundary out that way, you're going to kick that boundary out the other way. If they come back with a recommendation that you should split Ward 1 up into 2 different wards to include Wesleyville, or split Ward 2 up, it's somehow to, go the distance to change the population thing around, that's going to throw out the representation on council. Are we prepared to go that way? Like, you're talking to staff here. That was, I don't know if this has been proposed before, but in the past I have heard about 4 wards in the area. So can you help me with that?
Yes, Ed, a really excellent question. Thank you for bringing it forward. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Councillor Attridge to speak to that one particular question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll start at the beginning. So you're asking about whether Wesleyville was one of the impetus for moving this forward, and it wasn't. And in fact, when they do the review, we actually don't know what impact Wesleyville would have on it, because what they're supposed to be looking at is population. Wesleyville's population won't have changed by the time they do this. So under the provincial guidelines, what they're really looking for, and we see this all the time. So at the provincial level, at the federal level, wards change, right? The voting wards change, and they change based on how populations are growing. So the review is meant to come forward to have a look at our population, how it's grown over the years, and then be able to give proper representation. We don't know at this point what that outcome is. Now, you had said, hey, are you just, whatever they hand you, is this what you get? They don't hand you one option, they hand you options. And so then what we would end up doing is weighing the options. One thing that we've learned along the way is we are one of the few remaining municipalities from amalgamation who has not underdone ward boundary review. So like I said, it's supposed to be done every 4 to 5 cycles. We're on to 7 now. When they come forward, council will certainly look at all the options that they put forward. We don't know what those options could be, and we're not meant to recommend one. And in fact, they gave an example of another municipality where they put forward 3 options and council put forward a 4th and adopted the 4th, and the province overturned it and said, no, you don't get to do that. The process is the process. So the consultant will come forward, give us some options, we'll weigh them, and we'll choose. Did I answer all the questions, Ed? Hit me if I missed one.
think I'd know. I'm just wondering if this would have any effect. Well, it obviously would have an effect if we're 3, 4 wards, 2 wards, whatever, wherever it goes. I'm just curious as to what your thoughts might be on reorganizing the thing. Like we wouldn't, if it's more wards, then we wouldn't have a issue with 2 here and 3 here council members. So.
Right. And so when they put forward the options to us, those are things that we'll look at. So yes, there absolutely is a possibility where they may split boundaries differently so that there are smaller wards within. So let's say, I think you had said, could Ward 1 turn into 4 wards? Possibly, depending on how they do it. Could the composition of this council change because of it? Sure. And if it means that it's the right thing to do for this municipality, yeah, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing for the municipality so that the people are getting the right voice to this table.
I just wanted to say that to me, it's a big deal. Like it could be a very big deal for the whole municipality.
100%. And, we saw it just recently in the federal election. It went to Northumberland Clark, right? What were we prior to that? It was South Peterborough and so on. So this is a very common practice where they go through and they look at the populations and the density of areas and make sure that it is fairly being represented. We just haven't gone through it, and it's come forward already from the community saying, we just don't feel this is a fair representation right now.
And just to add to Todd, and I've got Claire too on the circuit. The other benefit about looking at different ward boundaries is that you could potentially have representation from each boundary that allows more direct involvement between a councillor and their represented population, because the area is smaller geographically, so there could be actually more accountability and more representation of a particular area. But again, it's hard to hypothesize at this point exactly what the proposals are going to be. But what we can say is that because we've been out of step with what other municipalities have done with going through this process, it's time for us to go through it. Councillor Clare.
And I'm not answering your question. I'm picking up on your question just to ask for a point of clarity. I just to confirm my understanding. I mean, there are rules around representation in the Municipal Act, and that have to be followed. So it's not possible that the consultants would come back and say this smaller group of people gets more votes. It would be equitable in terms of population. It's just a question of where the lines are drawn. But it does have to follow those rules of fairness, correct? Yeah.
Thank you, Ed.
Susan Smith, Ward 2. I would like to know, what is the annual surplus from 2024? That you should know what that is by now.
Director Baxter, would you like to provide any clarification for that?
So I can advise council that we've not finished our 2024 financials. We don't even have an audit booked at this point in time. We're waiting to hear from our auditors on that. So I don't even know.
So the taxes have been decided, but you don't know what the surplus is yet?
As Director Baxter had said, we're still waiting for the audited report on those final numbers. They have to be audited.
Which is when?
Do we have a sense of the...
Sorry to clarify, we don't have numbers to the auditors. We don't even have an audit. We don't even have we're waiting for an audit to be scheduled.
Okay.
We don't have the financials, put together, but.
So just to clarify, do we have a sense of the timelines around that at this point?
Should have a better understanding come June. But I also identified that as we went through the budget, process, that there are things that were incorporated in the budget from prior years that are more likely to lend us to a deficit than a surplus. So
Thank
we're
you.
phasing out of those as part of this year's budget, and we'll need to phase out again next year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pat Hallett, Ward 2. I'd like to know, will you be using all or only 80% of our non-interest revenue in the Ward 2 LLRW fund to reduce the Ward 2 tax levy?
I'm going to ask the chair of our finance committee to answer that question.
Yeah, we decided a number of years ago to allocate 80% of the interest. I don't know where you're thinking non-interest. It's interest on the principal amount of 10 million. And we made that decision. 20% is rolled back into the investment, and it just stays there and increases in value.
So you're going to be using 80% to
Yep.
reduce our tax levy?
Yep.
Okay. And another question. I'd like to know why the treasurer has stated incorrect amounts of what is available for the Ward 2 LLRW fund to reduce the levy, because the
And
numbers aren't the same.
which numbers are you talking about?
The numbers that were presented to you.
Well, we have audited numbers that we've put back to you and said that as far as we know, certainly from 214 on, they're absolutely correct. That the amount of money that was going from the LRW fund, which I believe started out at 10,200,000 in 2014, we gave you 80% a year, okay, throughout those years, and we built that 10,200,000 up to 10,600,000. So that was the effect of not giving you the full 100%. So it's all there. It's all explained. I don't know why it keeps coming up.
Keeps coming up because it's still a question.
Well, it's a great question.
If you
but
can't
we-
use the 2024 annual surplus to reduce the tax levy because you don't know what it is, when will you be using the 2023 annual surplus instead?
Well, wait a second. You're missing. Could you repeat that? Because I think you mixed two
I
things.
said, if you can't use the 2024 annual surplus to reduce the tax levy because you don't know what it is, will you be using the 2023 annual surplus instead?
I don't even know if there was a surplus in 2023.
Yeah, somebody should know. There seems to be a little bit of...
Just one second. I'm going to try to get you an answer to that question. I'm looking to Director Baxter, but I also see Councillor Clare has got her hand up, so I'm going to go in that order. Councillor Clare.
Yeah, I'm not going to fully address the question because, and Director Baxter may add more, but I think there was a response to this provided in the questions that were where the answers were posted as correspondence as part of this agenda. So I think that has been answered, but I'm sure I see, I guess Director Baxter could repeat that answer, but I did want to just clarify because I've got this question. I think we all have a lot about there's a thought out there that we are required to allocate surplus to reduce tax levy. That is one of the things that we are allowed to do with surplus, but per provincial rules and regulation, the other is that we are allowed to invest surpluses in our reserves for use for larger purchases in future budgets. It is not actually required by provincial law that we apply last year's surplus to the subsequent year's budget. That's not a fulsome read of the rules that are mandated by the province.
the way I understood the amalgamation paperwork is that the 10 million that we got from the federal government was to help keep our taxes low. That hasn't been happening because you can pretty well ask anybody in this room. We're a bunch of familiar faces to you because of this same issue. And there are questions that we have that have come back to us incomplete. You haven't answered our questions, and that's why we're asking the same questions again. And until we get complete answers, we're going to keep asking the same questions again and again, because we are taxpayers and our taxes are going up, and we want the answers from the people that are supposed to be looking after this stuff.
And thank you for coming up and you know, continuing to ask the questions. I think that just for a matter of record that Director Baxter did, in fact, as Councillor Toms brought up at the very beginning of today's meeting, answer the questions that were put in front of him in the time period that we had committed to get answers back. They were crafted quite meticulously to address the inquiries, and they were done in the spirit of transparency and accuracy. There were a follow-up email that we received with further inquiries and questions that came in at 12:30 today. And obviously, staff is going to require more time to look at that. So thank you very much.
One last thing. I understand that the figures that Mr. Baxter gave and the figures from CIBC are not the same, and I'd like to know why that is. There is a discrepancy.
Director Baxter, do you want to comment on that at this point?
I can certainly, I'll remind, I'm happy to provide a copy of the answers that I provided. I've specifically identified, we even report on the difference between the two. The two are different they're for two different purposes. So there's a lot of focus on the part that CIBC comes and presents. If we sold the entire portfolio on the day that that was effective, then what we end up doing would more so reflect that. But that isn't, I've explained this in the answer that I have provided. They're for two different purposes. They don't come up with the same result.
If you have a question, you can follow in the right order. Just a second. No, we're going to do this in order. There's someone at the podium asking a question. If you'd like to ask a question, you can follow right after. Okay. Thank you. Baxter, would you like to finish?
Certainly. So we identify the two different values in our financial statements. There's a note specific to it. I even put a picture of that right in the answers that I provided to the group, along with an explanation. Right, two different valuation methods for two different purposes. Right, they are different unless you are selling or the bonds are all maturing on the date at which both are being provided, in which case they would both be the same.
Sounds like magical math.
So I've provided an explanation in terms of why that is. Okay, I'd be happy to provide it if you haven't had a chance to go through and read it.
Thank
Sure.
you. Thank you very much. And I believe we have another question coming up to the podium. Come up to the podium and turn on the button. Identify who you are.
Astrid
and
De
your-
Maria, Ward 2. Since we're talking about the surplus and you didn't know how much was last year and if there was any the year before, there was a surplus before 2022 that was put into a reserve. Am I correct? So what happened to that? The annual surplus before 2020, and it's not when you were here, so you may not know the answer, but was supposedly started putting them before 22 in a reserve. What happened to that? Can we know if we have anything out of it, or has it just?
Okay, as you rightly put, that was prior to this council, but I will briefly ask Director Baxter to comment on this, and if you'd like to have a follow-up chat we can connect the two of you can,
I think
and
other
you can
people
meet with
want
them.
to know about that. If I'm the only one, I'm pleased to, but
And again, you know, I don't know how many of the folks here in the audience have had a careful look at the responses that Director Baxter had actually provided to the 11 questions and the information that resides there. I think that because this question really does pertain to a previous council, I'd like to connect you with Director Baxter to have that conversation and get that information, because we're not prepared to speak to something that was prior to our decision making.
all right, thank you.
And we have made a note of your name, and we will ensure that you get connected to get an answer to that.
Thank you.
Councillor Adam? Okay, you were going to say the same thing. Okay. Any further questions from the audience?
John, excuse me, John Cullen, Hope Township. First, I want to thank Daryl and Claire for looking at the election of a deputy mayor. I think it's a good move, bring us into the 21st century. And one thing I'm concerned about, that Mr. White was speaking of, is the boundary adjustment. Does that mean you're actually looking at changing the physical boundaries of some of the, because, I'm sorry, because I moved to Hope Township because I wanted to live in the rural area. And I don't want the rural area diluted with urban area. Rural and urban are different. We in the rural area are not Ward 1 people with a bigger backyard. We're rural people. So this concerns me about changing the boundaries. And other option or other point I'd like to make is the point of taxes. When we're talking about tax increases, we talked about dollar amounts and percentages, and I know it gets confusing because a lot of people don't understand percentages. I think what you should tell us each year is what the basic residential mill rate is and how much is increased, because that number relates to how we compute our taxes. So that means more to me, I think most people, than percentages, because one thing that people seem to forget is that our assessment in Ward 2, our average assessments are almost 1.5 times what they are in Ward 1. So when you quote a figure of it's going to be so many dollars per household, we have to almost add 50% to that, because that's our tax increase.
Can we start with those first two, just so we don't lose track?
Sorry?
I think there were a couple of questions in there potentially that maybe we can address before you move on.
Sure, go ahead.
So I think we we'll take note of your second comment about the mill rate, and in terms of the first comment about the ward boundary review, I'm going to also ask Councillor Todd to continue the conversation on that.
Yeah, totally appreciate where you're coming from on rural life and being, you know, distinct in its identity. And we don't know yet what the outcome would be. So yes, the boundaries could get redrawn, but if you look across Ontario, there are lots of municipalities that have rural communities who have gone through this process and have remained rural communities. So it's not necessarily that the identity or any concern about what you have now is the way in which you live and the reason why you chose that land. There's nothing that would say that that would change. It would simply be the way in which you voted.
Thank you.
So now we can tackle the
is there
next set of
more?
questions. Yes,
Okay.
please.
I just want to say that as part of the rural focus group, we've made 2 delegations to council, and our concerns are taxes. And I haven't heard anything tonight that's going to improve that. And I guess my question is, what are we doing about taxes? To give you an example, comparing Ward 1, Ward 2 / Hope Township, and Hamilton Township. Since the amalgamation in 2001, the municipal portion of our taxes has increased 137% as of 2025. 137%. Meanwhile, Ward 2, for the same period, has increased 25%. 25% compared to 137. Hamilton Township, 1%. Their mill rate is 1% higher in 2026 than it was in 2001. How can you explain that to anybody that lives in Ward 2? Why are our taxes so high? What are we getting for it? And what are you doing to improve it? This year we asked that our taxes be reduced to less than or equal to Hamilton Township. They went up 7%, municipal. Municipal taxes went up 7%. How do you justify that?
Thank you for that question. Before we get to that question, Councillor Clare did want to make another point in relation to an earlier point that you had raised. I'm going to turn the table to her.
Yeah, I can probably put them together because they're both about the mill rate. So your mill rate has increased. The mill rate is not the same as your property tax rate, right? Because the amount that your property taxes go up is also dependent on those other factors, the weighted assessment, the application of county tax policy and that. So part of the thing, if we're going to have this conversation in a meaningful way, I think we have to be clear. I think you do talk about mill rate a lot. You asked that was the previous question, which I also wanted to address, is that the mill rate is not what determines what your taxes is. It's what it has to be for the taxes to be what they need to be to fulfill the budget requirement. It's the last step. So we can't tell you in November what the mill rate is going to be because it's the last step after county's budget comes in, the school board, the weighted assessment, your MPAC assessment, and then the weighted assessment per county tax policy. So it's only at this time of year that could even be calculated. And it's the last step. And again, it's what's required. So the mill rate is not just a reflection of changes to the property tax levy. It's also a reflection of, has there been growth in industrial or corporate tax or business taxes, which take up a bigger share of the required tax levy, which keeps it lower for residential. Like there's all sorts of factors in the mill rate. So I think it gets confusing when we try to use tax rate and mill rate interchangeably because they're not the same thing, right?
I understand that, but if you're going to publish some kind of a figure, if you even want to wait, I don't really care, but I want to know how much my residential mill rate has increased the following year or for that year so I know how to compute my taxes. And I think 137% is obscene to increase our mill rate 137% over 25 years when Hamilton Township, who we used to be partners with and had less taxes than they did, 1%. How can you justify that? Pardon?
The mill rate going up by 1% does not mean that their taxes only went up 1%. It means the mill rate went up 1%. The implication on their actual property tax bill is actually dramatically different. And if you look at, as I have, and I've shared with you, I've given you these documents, right, where we looked at the Hamilton Township historical view of their actual property tax levy. The overall amount that they're collecting in taxes has increased significantly more than their mill rate because they are different things.
Hamilton Township has the lowest taxes in the municipality, in the Northumberland County right now. We have the highest. Unless you own farmland in Ward 1, Ward 2 has the highest taxes in the county. So why is that? That's all I have to say.
And we're still on that point. We are still awaiting, which Director of Corporate Services was still here, but we are still waiting a final consultant's report on some of these issues, which will be forthcoming in June. And an external third party was hired, and that report is coming forward in June as per this council's motion that was put forward. And so that will provide more information to answer some of these questions and concerns. Any further questions from the audience?
Sorry.
Good evening. My name is Anne Negri. I'm from Hope Township. My question is a very simple one, and it is directed to council, but it also includes the staff, which I'm not addressing directly. Given that the people of Port Hope, regardless of where they live, a portion of their taxes that they pay the wages of the councillors and the staff. So my question is really, and I think perhaps it should be contemplated upon, and by everybody here in the room and those watching, is given that set of circumstances, who is the employer and who is the employee? I say that without malice, but I think it's something that everybody needs to consider and have a long, hard think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment. And of course, we do have a governance structure that is in place, but I appreciate the feedback and the question.
With all due respect, it was a question.
Okay.
I realize that it's not an easy one to answer straight away.
Well, the current structure, as you probably understand it to be, is that we as a council have one employee in the municipality of Port Hope, and that is the CAO. The CAO is charged with the day-to-day operations of the municipality and overseeing the implementation of council direction throughout the staff composition of the municipality. They are in charge with the operations, the day-to-day decisions, and ensuring that the policy that is set at this table is implemented by the staff of the municipality. The council is elected every 4 years, and so all the constituents of Port Hope are in fact who we are accountable to. We have one member of staff that reports to us, and that is the CAO.
My question was, who is paying your wages?
Well, who is paying our wages is the people who voted us into office. So it's the constituents and the population of Port Hope.
Exactly. So that means that the men and women of Port Hope, regardless of where they live, are your employer. And if an employer is unhappy with their employees, then do they not have the right to fire the employees?
Well, that happens through a democratic process every 4 years. So the constituents of Port Hope go to the polls every 4 years. They make a decision about who is going to be representing them at the council table. And in 4 years, that opportunity to change the council composition is in front of the constituents of Port Hope once again, just like it is in what we've seen more recently with the provincial elections and with the federal elections. It's the democratic process.
I understand that. Let me put it another way. When a man or woman consents to being termed a resident or a person or a taxpayer, he's lost the status of being a man or a woman. He becomes indirectly an employee of the municipal corporation, the corporation of the municipality of Port Hope. So there's a level of, if you like, you say you represent the people, but it would be better to describe the word as that you represent the men and women as constituents, as residents, as taxpayers. I'm not a taxpayer. I'm not a person. If you go and look up the legal definition, I'm not a resident. I'm not a citizen. I'm a woman. And I stand in that capacity. And I think that, with no disrespect at all, I think we're, if I can speak frankly, and I'm not being rude, I'm not trying to be clever, but there's a shift happening because the whole system, and I'm not blaming anybody here, but with our federal government, with our provincial government, our municipalities, they're all operating as corporations. And that has changed the way people are dealt with. They become legal entities. We don't have a de jure government anymore. We have a corporation. And that is, let me finish, please. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to sow seeds for contemplation because it affects all of you as much as it does us. I want everybody, my fellow man and woman, to live in peace without wrong, loss, or harm. But this process or this movement towards a more corporate everything is removing the humanity. It's removing the heart. And that's why I asked the question, not to be combative at all. I appreciate that you're all good people. You have the best of intentions. But the structure that we find ourselves operating in is one that doesn't nurture a real sense of men and women living together, supporting one another, and trying to see everybody thrive. That's all.
And thank you for those comments, and thank you essentially for the question that you started with. I think that it's a broader conversation than we can solve here at the table, but I think that there are structures in which we are operating by virtue of being part of the municipality of Port Hope, the same as the structures that are in place right now for the provincial government and the federal government. If we want to change those structures, those are systems level changes that require time, but they also require certain outcomes in certain elections to represent those that are going to make the kinds of changes that are more aligned with what you're seeing as a future, that are resistant to the corporatization of political structures, that are working against the kind of model that you're envisioning for the future. So thank you for the question. I think it's a structural and system level conversation that can't necessarily be solved within the context of this particular council, but it spreads right across different levels of government. And certainly your observation about the corporatization of politics is a trend that we can all appreciate and see.
I appreciate it. My intention is just to sow the seed for not only you, but everybody else to think about.
Yes, and thank you. And I've got a couple of comments around the table around this. I'm not sure who had their hand up first, Todd, and then Claire.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I appreciate where you're coming from. This is my first term. When I got elected, I thought, okay, well, you get to go in there, you get to make some changes, you get to pivot, you get to do good things for the community, and then you realize there's a county rule book, there's a provincial rule book, there's a federal rule book, and you have to abide by all of them. And although, I also came from a place of, my taxes go towards paying for the government. And so then, there's this employer-employee relationship. And in fact, that doesn't exist because unlike an employer who can actually go in and change the environment around all of that, we actually are bound by the Municipal Act, which tells us what we can and can't do, when we can do it, how we can do it. And so that's a provincial play. And so I hear what you're saying about the corporatization of government and how some of that structure has changed. The playbook that we operate under isn't in this room. It sits at the provincial level. And so, in fact, even when we started talking about amalgamation, it came out of the Municipal Act when that was created. When we talk about education tax, it came from that being removed and pulled to the provincial level during that exact same time. All of those things happen at the same time. So I hear you. I'm with you. There are some changes that have to be made. Unfortunately, the rule books that we have are mighty. And so we are brought in and we have to work within those rule books. They're not always straight lines. So as much as I would have loved to have been able to come and say, if we're at point A and this is point B, this is how we get there. It's more like, if this is point A and this is point B, this is how we get there. And that's simply because the system's been built that way.
Councillor Clare, and then I also just had another thought that you just sparked.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad actually to follow you, because I think that's such an important point, always to remember. We don't get to make up our own rules on most things, right? We have to play by those rules, and sometimes we get we shoulder the concerns and the frustration from community because we're here in community with you, whereas the people who write those rules are not. And I think that's a really important point. But we had a conversation earlier with relation to one of the notices of motion that we deferred, that we do get to choose how we behave and what we say and the language we use and our intent, right? So, I'm with you. I always bristle a little bit at the notion of referring to people as taxpayers. So it's as if somehow we're in a transactional relationship, when in reality we're neighbors who live in community together, who are trying to, advance our future as a community. So I think language matters, and we can control that. We can control the language we use: taxpayers versus neighbors, community versus municipality, right? When it's appropriate. So I appreciate that point. I did just want to pick up a bit on the mayor's comment around the employee issue in terms of the employee of council. We're going to find out on June 3rd all the details about the implications of strong mayors. But my understanding from the reading I've done so far is that what the mayor described is what has been. That may no longer be. With strong mayor powers comes the ability to fire and appoint the CAO, and that is a unilateral power of a strong mayor. So I actually think right now it's questionable whether council has any employees.
And just a couple of things to follow up on this is that, yes, it's absolutely true that in theory, as we've talked about, so many municipalities have that power, but it's also true that a majority of mayors have delegated that power right back to the CAO. So it's not so much that it exists, it's what any one mayor decides to do with that power, and the delegation is there to continue the system much as it has existed before. But I just wanted to talk to a little bit of the point of what Councillor Todd was speaking about, is we are very much contained by the framework in which we exist, which is directed by the Municipal Act, by a broken fiscal framework of both the federal government and the province, and we are the children of the province, and we are very much dependent on what the province doles out to us in terms of the finances that we need to make up the shortfalls in all of our budget lines, everything from asset management to the infrastructure pressures that we see in our community. And we simply cannot continue to derive those monies from the residential tax base. So there's a larger advocacy play that has to happen, which is that both other levels of government need to be distributing more of the tax dollars right back to the local government. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make another point that hasn't really been made, but just something to reflect on, is that Port Hope is very rich in candidates who come forward in the election. There are many municipalities that they don't get to elect anyone. There's one person who runs in that ward, and that person is acclaimed. Scugog, for example, very comparable to Port Hope, rural, with a town the size, Port Perry as Port Hope. Only one ward, I think they have 5 wards, only one had 2 candidates running. All the rest of the wards, one person ran. And that's happening across the province. So I understand, sometimes we're not perfect and it's easy to sit here and say, you're not listening, can you do better? We try, but I think come election time, look around at the municipalities around you. There's not many people running in this position, and I don't know with strong mayors whether that will bring more people to the table or make more people decide not to run. We'll wait and see.
Thank you. And it's been a long evening, so it's now coming to the. Did you want to add one point?
Just one very small point, but item 3.1 tonight, the answers to the rural focus group questions that have come up extensively throughout question period. They are very much posted online for your perusal, but we've also, just in the interest of who's here tonight and who might be interested, we've printed a number of copies of the full answers. They're available over at the counter behind our Director of Finance.
Thank you for doing that, and I assume that's why we lost our director for a few minutes. So thank you for doing that and ensuring that we have dissemination of information in different means. So this concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda. Do you have a question? Okay.
Hi, I'm Bob DiMatteo, 8158 Gilmore Road in Campbellcroft. I want to address you as a citizen, and that's just a wonderful contribution to the discourse here. I think it's really raised things up many levels. So I want to talk first of all. Your citizens are angry. And what they're angry about is equity. And that's a big deal today, by the way. You have, one of your main programs are equity. As I'm told, equity is very important, So they're concerned about equity. And what they feel is not beyond your control, but within your control, the financial capabilities of the city at this stage of the game. For example, and I'm not going to talk about percentages. I know we got into a discussion the last time, about percentages, and they can be misleading. So let's talk about real cash, okay, money. And so, for example, there's $280,000 in grants of lieu that could be used to offset taxes. There's also at least $12.5 million accumulated annual surpluses that could be used to reduce taxes. So it's not a question of you not having it; it's there. The other is, why not take a look at all the annual surpluses that were accumulated before 2020? Okay, there's money there too. So we certainly don't want to push you to the brink where you don't have the power for it. We're saying you do have the power for it. It's a question of having the political will and to honor the commitment that was made upon amalgamation. And the commitment was, right? And you also, not this council, but a previous council, enshrined it in a bylaw, to deal with questions of taxation and budgets. Okay, that's your bylaw. All of a sudden, you're tossing that out the window as if it was yours to toss out. It's not.
So would you mind just trying to summarize it into a question that we can answer?
Yeah. Well, my question is, will you be using the $280,000 in grants in lieu to offset taxes? Are you going to be using some of the $12.5 million that's part of accumulated surpluses, to offset taxes? And what about all the other annual accumulated surpluses that were accumulated before 2020.
Thank-
It's there.
Thank you. And one
So
of
that's
the,
my question.
okay.
Okay?
Okay, so,
Don't rush to, I give you time to,
okay.
about 5 minutes.
So we are undertaking a tax allocation review. That was in response to the presentation and issues raised by the Rural Focus Group at our March 18th meeting at Council. So staff, just to be very clear, staff were directed by Council to undertake a third-party review of historic tax allocation and spending. And as a consultant has been retained, the review is underway and the report is anticipated to be presented to the June 17th meeting of Council. This will include a quantitative analysis of tax allocation and the impact of specific distribution policies over a number of years, and there will be an opportunity to receive further input from the Rural Focus Group as part of this review process. And the costs associated, of course, we've talked about this, are going to be coming from our growth readiness funds with no implications to the tax levy. So it's very much in progress.
No, that's not a bad start, okay?
Well, we have to
My
start
other
somewhere.
question is, what about the citizens? Do they have a role to play in that review?
Well,
You see that what's happening, Mayor, and you hinted at it before. And I know you're very erudite with respect to understanding the political scene. But I mean, what's happening here, is where somebody said, we're bureaucratizing, we're making it technocratic, we're giving everybody or certain people executive powers.
Yes.
When they shouldn't have executive
No,
powers.
but I actually
You
want to
know?
answer your
Yeah.
question, which is the role of the citizens of the community was to bring issues forward to this council table, and we responded to it by commissioning a report, not a staff report, but a report by an external consultant. So the issues were brought forward from the community, and we are responding to the ask that was made to us, and we will have a report in June, and we can continue to have the conversation. But I also see that Councillor Todd
Yeah, I
wanted
just
to.
want just to
Sure.
follow
Can,
up.
can I get Councillor Todd to also weigh in on this before
Yeah,
this? Just to.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
So what I was simply going to add is, I hear in your question around why can't we just take this money and turn this into something else, right? Like why can't we take $280,000 and turn it into XYZ? Why can't we lower taxes? And the short, low-hanging answer to that is you can. Government's about choices. And could we say, hey, we're going to chop your taxes? Yeah, we can chop your taxes, like pick a number. We can cut them in half if you want to. But then what do you not want?
Well,
yeah,
the
so
mayor
no.
talked about value for
Wait
money.
a second.
Where's
Wait a
the
second.
value for money for Ward?
Sorry. Wait.
Okay, I
so-
think
whoa,
that-
whoa,
I
whoa,
think
whoa,
that-
whoa, whoa,
I
whoa,
think
whoa.
just a second.
If we're gonna do a question period, I do need to be able to answer it. Otherwise, we don't need question period. So, roads, do you want them plowed or not? Bridges, do you want them fixed or not? Do you want motor vehicles? Like we spend a significant amount of money on making sure that there's plows and gravel and making sure that we've got guardrails, making sure there's infrastructure put in. This stuff costs money. And so it's about choices. And this council was challenged very early on about, do you want to invest in infrastructure? And the answer that we came up with is yes. Because if we don't, then one day when you go to cross Sylvan Bridge, it's not there anymore. And when we were talking to people, like I'll speak for myself, I can't speak for everyone else. When I was running for council, I spent time speaking to people in Ward 2. And when I was going out in Ward 2 residents were saying to me, why are you out here? Like, we don't vote for you. And it's like, no, but I'm going to sit up there at the horseshoe. I need to understand what your concerns are. And one of the things that absolutely rang true was the roads are the lifeline to Ward 2. That is how we transport our goods. That's how we get around. We need to make sure that all of that is working all the time. Otherwise, we can't operate our farms. We can't go from community to community. We are disconnected. And that money has to come from someplace. And it gets more and more expensive, and more things get downloaded from the province to us. And so, yeah, we have to keep paying for stuff. Otherwise, it's, where do you take it from? Yeah.
So did you want to have a final sort of question for us that we can respond to? Oh, yeah, sorry, you need to press your mic there.
Yeah, my time's up there. But anyway, I mean, what I want you to think about really is this whole question of equity. That's what is not falling in place.
And as
for the citizens.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we will have that report coming in June, which will hopefully continue the conversation and dialogue on these issues. We responded by commissioning that report. That's a step. It's not the whole picture, but it's a step in the direction. I know Councillor Clare also wants to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I probably.
That it's not costing you anything because it's coming out of the growth readiness fund, so it's not on the tax levy, just to be clear.
So I think, you know, we've had this, touched on some of this a little bit before, and the reason for the report, you know, I think it is a really important report because it is going to answer the question and give us information that helps us understand the equity concern, right? A lot of the questions that are being asked, I understand you're driving at equity, but a lot of the questions that are being asked are based on not quite fulsome factual information, like the underlying assumption, right? You know, the underlying assumption about what things cost and things. And I think this is going to give us that answer. Like, would it surprise you to know that we spend over $3 million a year on rural roads in 2025? That's in our 2025 budget. That's half of the total tax levy collected in the rural area. So, you know, these are things that are going to come forward in the report, so we can all look at those with clarity, so we understand, is there an inequity issue, or has the cost of running municipalities become exorbitantly expensive, and what are we going to do about it, right?
Okay, and is that a question? It's a question? Okay. Last question.
You know, I'm loud enough anyway, you know. I mean, why don't we look at what happened many years ago when they switched to market assessment in evaluating your homes, okay? In terms of what your tax rates were going to be or your mill rates were going to be, okay? Why didn't they deal with the downloading of all the services from the province to municipalities that don't have the tax base to carry out these functions?
That's a great
Why? Those
question,
are all questions.
and certainly I think those are questions that could be directed to every single level of government as to why we have the fiscal framework that we have at the moment, which is broken.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, at this point, then, do we have another question? Okay. Sorry, we're going to have to pause because we have a number of council members that do have to go to the washroom, and it is 10 p.m., so we're just going to pause. Okay, we have the full council composition, so now we will hear the question, please.
Is it on? My name is Dale DiMatteo, and I live in rural Port Hope, Campbellcroft to be specific. I initially wanted to talk to you about the weighted voting, and particularly the changes that it made in it, but the implications of the strong mayor on the rural Port Hope concerns are very real, to the point of weighted voting being a moot point. I'd like to begin to share some criticisms of the strong mayor that appeared in an academic journal called Policy Options by Professors Taylor and Horrock from Western University. They state that Bill 39.
Sorry, can I'm saying this with
gonna
the
be-
utmost respect. Is this possible for you to summarize the findings of this academic paper and share it with all of council, but
it's
really
very
actually ask
short.
the question that you wanted to ask of us in
It
relation?
won't take me more than a minute or so to get through this. I'm not reading the whole thing.
Okay.
Just a few parts of it. Okay. Bill 39, the Strong Mayor Bill, gives power that no other governing executive of any Western democracy has to pass bills with only a third of council vote. In a six-member council, the mayor would only need one other councillor to support them to win a decision. The authors go on to talk about how this bill undermines local democracy. They admit that strengthening mayoral powers is not without some merit if it's rooted in consensus building rather than authoritarian rule. A well-thought-out set of reforms giving both council and mayors specific powers and responsibilities, for example, separating mayors into solely administrative role and councillors solely as legislators, while providing councillors with resources for them to do their own research, engage with staff equally, and have certain veto powers of their own, thus setting up a true checks and balance system of government. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. The government of Ontario has enacted a series of ad hoc, increasingly radical measures with repercussions that may well last long and deeply damaging to local democracy. The foundation of Western democracy is majority rule. Bill 39 entrenches a new principle, minority rule, rolling back nearly 400 years of democratic development premised on checks and balances. But once enacted, these laws will exist for years to come. What might future Ontario government's priorities be, we can only guess. Bill 39 will erode local autonomy and normalize minority rule as a legitimate governing principle. Minority rule has no place in a democracy, and Bill 39 should be immediately repealed. My question is this: will Council take a stand against Bill 39 on behalf of your constituents in protecting our democratic rights and defending democratic principles of governance in general? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, and I would certainly encourage you to take that same research and that same study and that same question directly to the province and ask them for an answer to those questions, since they're the ones that enacted this legislation onto the municipalities with no consultation and no warning. This council is on record of passing a motion in relation to Strong Mayor's powers. That is on our record. We did that prior to this even coming to the table. I am on record with a statement, a clear statement in relation to Strong Mayor's powers, and we are going to have more training and education on June 3rd, after which we will follow through and have further conversations and discussions, because as the clerk has pointed out, this is groundbreaking, it is paradigm shifting, and we need to have all the information so that we know how we're going to move forward as a council. That training and education is open to the public. It's an open session. And the more information will be forthcoming around that. That's correct. More information will be available around that event. It is open to the public as well as for council. Thank you very much, everyone. This concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda, and I'm in a position to adjourn the meeting. The committee of the whole is adjourned at 10:08 p.m. And thank you for everybody who stayed to the very end. We appreciate it.